Hello, hello. Can anybody hear me?
Hi, yes. Fred. We can hear you. Hi, Alana.
I was worried. Jeez.
At 6 o'clock, we're going to have a group song.
And like when I came on, it was so silent. I was just like, well, let me just close my screen.
I was in.
Thank you, Fred, for bringing the energy.
I think I'm 5 minutes.
Are we supposed to be muted? How's everyone? Hi, Rachel. Hi, Jeevan.
Good, good.
Hi, Alana. Hi, David.
Oh, is that Alana? Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Move for adjournment. I'm only kidding.
Fred, you know we can kill your mic, right?
No.
Okay.
Put the light on.
Hi, Mark.
The time for the Finance Committee budget hearing meeting having come, we'll call this meeting to order. Today is Wednesday, June 6th, hour 6 p.m. The call of the meeting is as follows. The Finance Committee will conduct public hearings on the city and school budgets covering the fiscal period July 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2021. This evening's meeting is to discuss the school department's budget. We are going to be joined by our school superintendent, the members of our school committee, who is our co-equal governing body, the governing body whose jurisdiction is the schools. I believe we'll be joined by the city manager at some point. We're going to begin our meeting by remarks from our co-chairs, after which we're going to have public comment. I read my agenda. Yep. And then we will have remarks from the budget chair of the school committee, remarks from our mayor, short remarks from our superintendent, and questions from the finance committee of the city council. Now, the finance committee of the city council is a committee of the whole, and so those that may be viewing will notice that all 9 members of the city council are present. Members of the finance committee will then have the opportunity to ask 2 questions of the committee, and if time permits, we'll go around again. The reason this is similar to the format we used in the last 2 budget meetings that we've had. After which we'll have a vote on the school committee budget and then adjourn. At this time, I will yield the floor to my co-chair, Councilor Carlone. Councilor Carlone, you have the floor. I'm sorry? Oh, wait a minute. I have my own notes and not reading them. We're going to first call the roll of the city council. We will call the roll of the school committee, and then we will go check again just to make sure that the meeting is audible to all members. With that, I yield the floor to our clerk. Thank you, Mr. Clerk.
Councilor Carlone.
Present.
Present. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Present.
Present. Councilor McGovern.
Present.
Present. Councilor Nolan. Present. Councilor Simmons.
Present.
Present. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Present.
Present. Councilor Toomey.
Present.
Present. Councilor Zondervan. Councilor Present. Mayor Siddiqui.
Present.
Present. I'll now move over to the school committee. Committee member Monica L. Bowman.
Present, and it's vice chair.
I'm sorry, Vice Chair Monica L. Bowman.
Thank
Present.
you. Present.
Committee member Alfred B. Fatini.
Present.
Present. Committee member Jose Luis Rojas Villarreal.
Present.
Present. Committee member David Weinstein.
Present.
Present. Committee member Rachel Weinstein.
Present.
Present. Committee member Aisha Wilson.
Present.
Present. All members of the City Council and the school committee are present.
Mr. Clerk, should we do an audio check, or do you think the roll is sufficient?
Check.
The clerk will now do an audio check. This check is to make sure you can be heard and that we can hear you. You can hear us, excuse me.
Vice Mayor Mallon, is the meeting clearly audible to you?
Yes.
Councilor McGovern, is the meeting clearly audible to you?
Yes.
Councilor Sabrina Wheeler, is the meeting clearly audible to you?
Yes.
Councilor Zondervan, is the meeting clearly audible to you?
Yes.
Mayor Siddiqui, is the meeting clearly audible to you?
Yep.
Vice Chair Bowman, is the meeting clearly audible to you?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Committee member Fatini, is the meeting clearly audible to you?
Yes, thank you.
Committee member Villarreal, is the meeting clearly audible to you?
Yes, thank you.
Committee member David Weinstein, is the meeting clearly audible to you?
Yes, it is.
Did you say yes?
Yes.
Committee member Rachel Weinstein, is the meeting clearly audible to you?
Yes.
Committee member Aisha Wilson, is the meeting clearly audible to you?
Yes, thank you.
The meeting is clearly audible to all remote members.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. I apologize, I forgot the pledge and the moment of silence. So at this time, we're going to have the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand where you are, and then we're going to pause for a moment of silence to remember the man in Minnesota, but the so many other people who have lost their lives to police brutality. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mr. Co-Chair, I yield the floor to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My comments will be brief. Just as with the city budget, there is a lot of information in the school budget document. And if you take the time to review it, you can learn quite a bit. My questions tonight will probably be solely based on what different statistics mean. But it is an impressive document. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. We'll now hear from Mr. City Manager. I know you said you did not necessarily want to speak, but did you want to speak? Seeing that you're here.
Through you, Madam Chair, I guess I could say that I just want to thank everybody for working together to come up with this budget. The relationship between the city manager and the superintendent in school and the city council and the school committee, since the 40 years I've been involved with school budgets, has always been one to work together. I think this year is the same as it's always been. We've really worked hard to come up with this budget. I'm extremely proud of the fact that even during the COVID-19 budget revision, we were able to keep the school budget whole. And I think it's very important, especially based on the importance that the city and all our residents place on education. So I'm here to listen, but I will be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. We'll now turn to public comment. I believe there are two people that have signed up. And they are, who's the first person? Because I can't see any names. It's Dan Monahan. Are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes. You have 3 minutes to participate in public comment, and you now have the floor. Please give your name and your address for the record.
Thank you. I'm Dan Monahan, 229 Lexington Ave. I'm the CEA president and also the parent of a CRLS senior. Councilor Simmons and members of the City Council and Finance Committee, thank you for the opportunity for this hearing and public comment on the school budget. I also really want to express my appreciation for how the city has managed its finances to allow for us to maintain the planned budget in this time of many budget cuts across the state. I'm asking you to vote in favor of the budget this evening. Those of you who have heard my public comments on the budget know that I believe the process that was undergone and the final budget itself have some flaws. I strongly believe that the right thing to do right now is to pass it so that we can focus our efforts on supporting our scholars and caregivers most in crisis now due to the pandemic, as well as the trauma that many, particularly our Black and Brown scholars, caregivers, and educators, continue to experience, particularly acutely right now with institutional and interpersonal racism. The superintendent and school committee listened to many educators and caregivers advocating for a transformational anti-racist budget. While this budget isn't quite that yet, it is moving very much in the right direction. The CEA Educators of Color Coalition advocated strongly for funding for systems to support the response to the Building Equity Bridges findings, particularly the importance of centering and supporting educators of color. Through the process, the superintendent added more clarity to the ways the funds for the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging can be used to do just that. I also agree with the superintendent that the budget alone is neither the sole nor the most powerful lever for anti-racist change. We've begun to see in the later portions of the budget process, as the superintendent has engaged directly with the leaders of the Educators of Color Coalition and funded 3 convenings and 3 working groups to share power and ensure broader representation of educators of color in decision-making processes. This has been a model that I hope will be emulated next year, much early in the budget process, to even better center educator voice and share power. I share this because I know that many are frustrated with the slow pace of closing opportunity and achievement gaps. Many educators share that frustration, but this is a glimmer of change on the horizon. While the change will not be fast, I believe the effects of the Building Equity Bridges work are beginning to have positive impact on Cambridge Public Schools. My hope is that at this time next year, you'll see a truly transformational budget that has come from deeper engagement with educators, youth, and caregivers of color, who are the ones who best know how to address the systemic inequities that persist. I hope you'll see a budget where anti-racism is explicitly at the center of all decisions, not just a definition quoted when needed. I hope this describes what you're ultimately looking for, and I ask you to continue to advocate hard for this kind of change. Tonight, I urge you to vote in favor of this budget in order for us to get to the critical work of changing how we do education in Cambridge.
Thank you, Mr. Monahan. Our next speaker is Mr. Tony Clark. Mr. Clark, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, barely. So you can speak a little louder into your phone or whatever you're speaking into. So please take the floor.
That a little better?
A little better. Please give your name and your address for the record.
My name is Tony Clark. I live at 17 Elm Street in Newton, Mass.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you, Madam Chair, and the assembled guests today. Like the previous speaker, I too will be discussing the budget from an equities lens. Looking at the budget, particularly pages 18, 19, 18 and 19 are clearly spell out outcomes and deliverables, which are clear and succinct, and which I appreciate. However, there are a number of other pages, 29, 30, 45, and 11, that have sounded to be more aspirational. And while we are in a space where we look at race and class throughout not just our city, but out the country at this particular time, I ask that the assembled members ask tough questions around this particular budget, particularly as it pertains to looking at students of color and supports for their families. Without being too critical of the work, as I'm certain putting this budget together was a hard task, considering the myriad of things that are going on right now, both in our country and locally, I would like the assembled folks to begin to examine the opportunity to ask yourselves, is this really addressing anti-racism and the inequities in this particular school district? As you look through the budget, all 277 pages, excluding the the overviews of the respective schools. At some points, it's more aspirational, and other points, it's clearly succinct. And as you look through it, I want you to ask yourselves, what portions are aspirational and which points are more succinct? So as you begin this process, I welcome the opportunity to support you in your work. And I hope that you begin to look at the fact that talking about anti-racism is one thing, being critical and doing the work is another. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Clark was the last person that was signed up for public comment. We'll leave public comment open for 30 minutes, as is our practice at our meetings. We'll move now, and so Mr. Clerk, please remind us at the 6:30 time. We will have remarks from the Budget Co-Chair of the School Committee, Ms. Monica Bowman. Madam Vice Chair, you have the floor.
Thank you, Councilor Simmons. Good evening to my colleagues of the City Council and municipal staff who work tirelessly to ensure Cambridge Public Schools have the resources needed to educate our scholars. We come before this body fully aware of the challenging times we find ourselves in. When my budget co-chair, Mr. Fantini, and I started the formal budget process in January of this year, our goal was to transform how the school committee engaged the public. We held interactive budget meetings with the community and shared the how and the what of the budget process with CPS families as a means to share power and knowledge, and centered the importance of student data in our decision making. In all of the committee's budget conversations, at the center of it was creating equitable academic outcomes and a sense of place for our students that are historically left behind within our school district. We wanted to make sure that they were front and center. And then COVID-19 hit us. Our students and our educators were abruptly taken from the classroom and thrown into remote learning. They were placed in a position where they were not able to have their end-of-school rituals and adapt to an environment that was foreign for both students as well as educators. We are fully aware that the task before us is really challenging. We know that the impacts of COVID-19 has been highlighted in our budget process through the leadership of our mayor in collaboration with our administration, as well as with the budget co-chairs, to extend the conversation so we can really understand what are the impacts that COVID-19 will have on the school district. And we're still discovering what those challenges are. Unlike districts from across the nation and across the Commonwealth, we are adding $11 million+ to our budget. We are positioned to tackle some of the unthinkable things that we now have to put in place to mitigate the health concerns that are associated with COVID-19, as well as hold those things in tension with the achievement gap that is constantly before us when it comes to the work that we do as leaders within the Cambridge Public School District. I am grateful that our city manager has been committed to giving our district the resources needed to ensure we are able to tackle the challenging moment we find ourselves in. And as I close, I want to thank my colleagues for having a robust conversation on what are the challenges that our students will be facing in the context of COVID-19, in the context of equity, and in the context of how we work collaboratively to move the district forward. I want to thank my co-chair, Mr. Fantini. I want to also thank Mrs. Spinner, who is our Chief Financial Officer, and her staff for putting in tons of hours to ensure that we have the necessary information so we can make informed decisions as it relates to our budget. And of course, last but not least, our leader of our school district, Dr. Kenny Salim, who worked collaboratively with myself, my budget co-chair, and the mayor, Mayor Siddiqui, to ensure that we can have the necessary conversations to bring forth this budget. And at this time, I yield the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Thank you for your remarks, and thank you for your commitment to the school, the scholars, and their families. We'll now hear from our mayor. Mayor Siddiqui, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. So as the Vice Chair stated, I think this budget process for me and for at least 4 other members was new, right, on the school side. So we had 5 new school committee members. And then while the process started in January, it still felt really short because there were always a lot of questions. There was always new information to learn. And I'll admit there's still, and I think many of us still feel this way, there's still questions around how a budget comes together. And then we were faced with COVID in early March. And that has been a challenge on its own. And which is why I, in collaboration with the committee members, wanted to call a series of special meetings before we moved on voting the budget to really understand that context. We have, I think, more questions than answers at this point too. And it's going to be even a more challenging process because we're further exacerbating, this pandemic is further exacerbating the data that we already have, this achievement gap that we talk about, this opportunity gap that we talk about. So I think that as we move forward, the critical questions that I know many of you will ask, and some of you I've spoken to, I'll admit, I don't have the answers, but I do know that we have a huge responsibility to figure out how we get to those answers and how we make sure that if we are spending almost $30,000 per pupil and we have these persisting gaps, how are we closing them? What are we doing well and what are we not doing well? And I think that being transparent about that is key. And I think all of us on the committee, on the school committee side, we know that. And I think we are struggling with that. And I think you'll see in this budget, there's a lot of key initiatives that we hope will be the anecdote. But again, they may not be. And I think we have to keep thinking collaboratively around how we get there. Because right now, with this pandemic, we have a long way to go. So with that said, I think this budget process, there were a lot of key learnings. We tried new things that didn't happen in the past that the Vice Chair discussed. I think moving forward, we have a lot of other things that we'll have to incorporate. Student voice is one of them. And so there's a lot of key things that we've learned that I'm committed to, along with the school committee, to implement as we move forward. I'm happy to say more at the end, and I look forward to the questions that my colleagues, the important questions that my colleagues will raise. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Before I turn the floor over to the superintendent, I want to speak specifically to the school committee members. First, I wanted to welcome you to this process. I know we have had the opportunity to be together in our roundtable, but we have not, because of circumstances far beyond our control, been able to enjoy the opportunity and the camaraderie we usually enjoy when circumstances are quite different. So please, I'd like to personally thank you for the work that you've done preparing this budget. Unlike the City Council, the school committee is far more hands-on than the City Council, and so I know that you've turned and churned and had hearings and wrote and rewrote, and I certainly do respect the amount of work, the time, and the effort that you put in developing this budget. I want to thank you for your commitment to children. I know that our children, you call them scholars. I really like that word. I want to thank you for your commitment to the CPSD scholars and their families. It shows in your hard work that you show every first and third Tuesday and all those subcommittee meetings in the middle. So I certainly appreciate, having been a former school committee member, the work that you do. And with no disrespect or to belittle the work of the city council, I often say the school committee works twice as hard as the city council does. And so with that, again, I want to thank you for your hard work. I look forward to having this discussion over your budget. And with that, I will turn the floor to our superintendent, Dr. Kenny Salim. I don't know who is with you, Dr. Salim. The part of this process is so surreal. I can't see anyone, so I'm just talking to blank chairs. So, Dr. Salim, the floor is yours for brief remarks, after which we will open the floor to the Finance Committee for questions. Dr. Salim?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So thanks for having us this evening and for this hearing. Thanks to the City Council, all the councilors, and we do have members of my leadership team, including Deputy Superintendent Dr. Turk and Chief Financial Officer Claire Spinner, who will join us by visually, as we get to the question period. As Vice Chair Bowman and Mayor Siddiqui have already pointed out, when we were putting together this budget, we were in a very different circumstance. When I actually presented a proposed budget on March 12th, it was actually the same evening that we announced the initial 2-week closure of schools. And so over the last couple of months now, we've had an opportunity to really make a shift in terms of how we've been talking about the budget, particularly with a focus around our needs related to budget and the COVID-19 recovery plan. I'm going to share a set of slides, which I'll go through as efficiently as possible, and then turn it over to the to you, Madam Chair, to facilitate questions. One of the things that we did in putting together this presentation was to build on some of the discussion that we had at the roundtable that we had in February. Originally, we had had some conversations around having some follow-up, which of course was not possible due to the closures and the changes that happened. But wanted to, as you'll see, as we put together this agenda, it was informed by the comments and thinking at that time. So I'm going to go to my screen here and so starting off, just to give an overview of where we're headed, we'll share briefly just sort of summary around the district plan outcomes, the 7 outcomes that we've set for the district plan, as well as where we are with regard to those outcomes. I'll talk about the FY21 budget broadly in terms of the investments, specifically where we are looking at new investments, share a summary around our COVID-19 recovery planning and some of the steps underway. We've heard a number of questions around a district focus and proposal around equity, inclusion, belonging, which I'll speak about. And then we'll close with a few slides just around this planning for summer 2020, another area that we've heard that counselors have had questions and interest in learning more about. So starting off, many counselors and certainly the school committee members are familiar with our district plan strategic objectives, our vision around rigorous, joyful culture, responsive learning, plus personalized support leading to post-secondary success and engaged community members. And since the development of this plan, which was done in collaboration with many members of our community and various stakeholders, educators, students, families, administrators, committee members, we developed this plan centered on these objectives that you see here. And equity and access has continued to be a central focus. A big part of developing the district plan, and actually this was done when Councillor Simmons was mayor and chair of the school committee, is we also established not just the outcomes, but also targets related to these 7 areas. And the school committee determined these outcomes to have a mix of not just academic, traditional academic measures like MCAS and advanced placement, but also looking at other measures that are important to the Cambridge Public Schools and our entire community, and areas that we know are important when we think about the challenges of the opportunity gaps that exist for our students. The percentage of teachers of color, the school climate, the way in which students believe they have meaningful relationships with adults, as well as their attendance, chronic absenteeism as a measure in schools as well. The first measure around grade 3 literacy is an area where we have seen growth over the last couple of years. you see in the both in the aggregate as well as on the bottom part of the slide, just a breakdown in terms of how different demographic groups are performing. And while it is only just one measure, we do provide the state comparison because that is a comparison that is available to us to give a picture of where we see the performance of our students. And while we do see year over year, 2017 was the baseline year when there was a new next generation MCAS. We've seen growth since that time, but we do see also troubling gaps that continue with a number of our demographic groups. Where we've tried to, in our current budget, really try to address some of these areas include the systematic phonics instruction that now is in place in every elementary school, new curriculum, the focus around culturally responsive teaching as a few specific areas. Grade 8 math is another area that has been part of our outcomes, and as you can see also that there's been year-over-year growth since 2017, where we've had increase in that first year as well as in the second year, whereas actually at the state level we see there was a dip in the most recent data. And again, we see some of the demographic data in terms of overall performance in the most recent 2019 MCAS results. We have been really focusing on a couple of key areas, the work around enhanced math to detrack mathematics at the upper school level to provide more access to students to high standards and expectations, to be able to engage in ambitious routines, instructional routines. We've also rolled out this current year K-5 math interventionists across all of our elementary schools as part of our strategy. AP and honors is the third outcome that looks at a number of different measures related to this, including the participation of students in the AP, in taking AP exams, in enrolling in AP classes, as well as in performance. And you can see the increase in the last year in test taking as well as enrollment, and a sort of stable and then slight dip into from 2017 to 18-19 in terms of percentage of students scoring 3 to 5, as we've also expanded the number of students. The level up strategy at the high school is one of the areas that has been a major investment to try to increase that pipeline to advanced coursework, as well as more tactical pieces for communication to families, student AP preparation, as well as partnerships with a number of organizations to provide opportunities for students to engage in pre-AP and AP work. The percentage of teachers of color has been a focus of the school committee for many years. We're pleased that we've been able to make gains year over year in the last number of years, where when we began in 16-17 with a percentage of 20%, have increased to this current year of 25%. And that is truly due to a real investment and focus and reorganization around a dynamic diversity office, an explicit focus on how recruitment, retention, and hiring can be designed to attract diverse candidates, as well as focusing on retention. We have employee resource groups, which are affinity spaces for that are race-based for educators, as well as expanding the pipeline for paraprofessionals into the teaching profession, as well as strategies like training and implicit bias and overhauling job descriptions. The next couple of outcomes relate to school climate and student relationships, and these are areas where we've either been stagnant or have dipped a little bit in the last couple of years. And you see some of the, one of the things that we did over the last, as part of the district plan, was to create this new outcome and this new measure with school climate surveys that had not been done before we had launched the district plan. And so you see that we launched that in 2018, and we're measuring both favorable rating as well as family survey participation. With students' meaningful connection to adults, we've been using a teen health survey and middle grades health survey, a specific question related to how students identify whether they have a meaningful connection with adults. And we have some of the targets here, as well as what you see in terms of demographic subgroups. also some very concerning gaps in the aggregate, as well as across our different demographic groups when we look at both the high school and upper school.
Dr. Salim, can you hold just for a moment? I need to entertain a motion by Councilor Carlone to close public comment. All those I was going to say all those in favor. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
On the motion, Councilor Carlone.
Yes.
Yes. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor McGovern.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Nolan.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Simmons.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Toomey.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Zondervan. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Yes. Mayor Siddiqui.
Yes.
Motion passes 9 in favor, 0 against.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Dr. Salim, please continue. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so the seventh outcome is around chronic absenteeism, which is also a measure that's used by the state as part of our overall accountability system. And this is an area where we did see a slight decrease, and have been working with the across schools and the high school in particular around strategies around supporting teachers, communicating with families, and using a data dashboard. So across all of these outcomes, a big part of our plan is to make sure that we are as transparent as possible. To be able to engage in conversations around improvement, we need to know where we are, both where our successes are as well as where our continuing challenges are. And so we do have a data dashboard on our website where any of this information is available, and that we also at the school level also use school level data and a range of different assessments to also inform decisions instructionally as well as programmatically. The next part I'm going to speak to is an overall summary around our FY21 budget. As counselors may know, we've had increase in terms of enrollment really over the last decade, but you'll see here this slide talking about the last 6 years or so, where in the we're projected into the next year an increase again, going up to about a little over 7,300 students, and the 5-year increase about 8.7%. And so this is also something that, as we describe in our budget, we have a number of investments that are enrollment based due to the increased number of students, as well as the specific needs of students that are part of our population. When we talk about the alignment of resources to improve outcomes, we think about it certainly in terms of financial dollars, but also how we're using time, how we're using staff. And when we put together the priorities for this budget in collaboration with the school committee, we looked at how organizing around these areas, improving instruction, prioritizing equity, inclusion, belonging, looking at how we can increase access to engaging high school coursework and post-secondary pathways, looking at our out-of-school time opportunities and how we can continue to use that important lever to support student academic success, continuing to make progress in increasing educator diversity, and then evaluating and improving our use of resources. And since the March 12th proposed budget, a real focus recently, certainly around the COVID-19 recovery plan, looking at the resources necessary to protect the health and safety of students and staff, as well as focusing on what we know will, are and continue to be academic and social, emotional, and mental health needs of our students. The budget increase is an increase of 5.9% or 11.9 million. And as was noted earlier, we're grateful to the partnership with the city manager and his team as we have looked to look at not just maintaining support for our students and our families with the existing resources and the increasing enrollment, but also new and expanded investments to support the district plan. So this budget increase includes an increase of 57.5 FTEs, which are a combination of both enrollment and programmatic needs. So programmatic needs refer to needs related to, for example, special education programs, and district plan budget priorities refer to initiatives that I'll be speaking to in a moment. There also are the increases that are just part of the cost of regular increases that happen year over year, including step and lane increases for salaries, contract increases, in this case, specifically transportation, as well as maintenance, safety, and administrative and technology and supply increases. When developing the budget, there were some real clear themes that came from the roundtables, the budget retreats, the community meetings, as well as feedback from principals, administrators, and teachers. What you see on the right in the bullet points are really collectively what are some of the themes that came from all of those sources. The idea around making sure to connect the work to outcomes, to think about the needs of struggling learners and identification of them, prioritizing equity initiatives, including the anti-bias, anti-racism, cultural proficiency training for staff and families, recruitment, retention, and professional pathways for educators of color, continuing to look at how we deepen our objective around family engagement and partnership, and also with our out-of-school time partners as part of our community, level up and detracking, as well as social, emotional, and mental health and behavioral needs. When looking at the budget priorities and the investments across the budget, this slide summarizes what are some of those investments that are aligned with the district plan needs. You'll see the literacy, invention, and instructional coaching investments, partnership with the Landmark School, specifically with our language-based learning disability program that is at the Grand Parks and Vassal Lane Upper School and High School. Equity, inclusion, belonging, an area that I'll speak a little bit more about in a little bit in the presentation, that includes both the work around racial equity as well as family engagement, partnership, and social emotional learning and behavioral mental health. We have an investment in terms of a partnership with Leslie University called Project Elevate to expand the opportunities for paraprofessionals to attain master's degrees and also teaching particularly in high needs areas like special education. High school coursework and post-secondary pathways, the work around Level Up, continuing to expand that as that program expands. Investments in early college and expanding those opportunities for students to get credits in high school before they graduate. CRLS and RISTA positions to expand opportunities for students, as well as a review of the CT RISTA program that's part of our budget. Out of school time opportunities, a position to launch an elementary OST network that is really building on some of the lessons learned from the middle school network that's been in place for a number of years in Cambridge, and looking at how we can have as robust a partnership with our elementary programs and elementary partners, as well as summer and school year programs as well. And then finally, the improved use of strategic scheduling, evaluation, and research, and specific areas where we have found ways to support that work as part of our improvement objectives. A few slides just around the COVID-19 recovery planning. As we have engaged in the planning, we've thought about these 5 different areas. There certainly are things like facilities and safety related to the health and safety of our students and families and educators, the teaching and learning and student support as we think about how we continue to strengthen distance learning, which, as everyone knows, we sort of made a shift to, along with every other district in the Commonwealth in very rapid fashion, and thinking about what is the educator and staff support in order to support that. We also have thought a lot about family support and how do we make sure there are supports in place also to support families during this next stage, as well as overall system support, thinking about how we maintain also our operations centrally as we move forward. And so we know that while there's still a lot unknown, we're planning for multiple scenarios, including in-person, remote learning, and the potential hybrid models. We anticipate the state will be providing more specific guidance around the health and safety requirements and potential social distancing requirements in mid-June. And we also are thinking about this. It's not just as a short, mid, and long term in terms of needs. In terms of planning structure, we are finalizing a task force, which is comprised of experts in different areas, as we are thinking about the different areas, both related to health and safety, distance learning, family engagement, as well as having different stakeholder voices as part of that task force. There'll be a steering committee that helps to organize a lot of the development of the plan moving forward. We've started also in partnership with our school committee members of using subcommittees for also having forums for discussing specific issues. And then we are designing a set of working groups that will include various stakeholders as we develop this plan to be able to have an inclusive process. School-based planning teams will also be coming together in the summer in order to develop operational plans, and they'll be also technical support that we'll be engaging to support this work. When we think sort of budget related specifically, related to preliminary projections related to the recovery plan, we've mapped out a range that will certainly be refined over time as more information becomes available. But you see here related to both health and safety, around teaching and learning, technology and staff development, potential costs between 3.8 and 6.0 million. And when we think about the funding sources to support that, there are federal funds that have been issued to school district as part of the CARES Act. There's a range still of that is still being finalized as we figure out the details of that. There may be additional federal funding in time. We also have looked at our current FY21 budget, and so as part of the budget process in the last several weeks, leading to the adoption of the budget by the school committee, we've identified 1.4 million that we've redirected, or reallocated, or identified as ways we can redirect to the recovery costs. In terms of end of year balance, also looking to bring those forward and have, in collaboration with the city manager and his support, looked at ways of bringing those dollars forward. And will I also identify, depending as the year progresses, what additional one-time funds might be necessary based on the recovery needs. Shifting a little bit to the specific focus on equity, inclusion, belonging, I want to share just a couple of slides related to this work. As counselors know, we've shared this in last year's presentation as well, that as part of our work around equity and racial equity, we have codified with the school committee definitions related to both of these pieces in our work. And building on that, have really looked at how we can think about what it means for us to be a district that can move more towards being an anti-racist district. Over the last number of years, there have been a number of different efforts to that are equity-related initiatives. In addition to the adoption of the definition, we launched the Building Equity Bridges project, funded by the Nellie Mae Education Foundation. Partnering with the Cambridge Education Association was a commitment I made a couple of years ago to pursue this effort in order to better examine the root causes of inequity to inform our work. And so a lot of what we talk about with the equity, inclusion, and belonging focus has come from the findings of that work. But we've hired and retained more educators of color, as well as I mentioned earlier, launched Project Elevate to increase the pipeline, worked on district-wide and school-based trainings as a focus specifically on racial equity, cultural proficiency as a part of all school improvement plans, and the detracking efforts at the high school and the upper schools with Level Up and Enhanced Math at the upper schools are also a key equity strategy. And then finally, the student, staff, and family surveys as ways of also elevating stakeholder voice. A big part of the adopted budget is this new Office of Equity, Inclusion, Belonging, which will be led by a Chief Equity Officer. Includes staff that are part of this office that include a new Director of Family Engagement, a Principal on Assignment, a Family Engagement Specialist, as well as, in addition to the Chief Equity Officer, an additional staff member and an incident reporting specialist that would be housed at the high school. We've looked at these 4 domains around climate relationships, social emotional learning, mental behavioral health, family engagement, and racial equity and anti-racism as living together in this office because of we want to make sure that we're not siloing these pieces from one another and thinking about how we're using common measures and the intersection of this work to strengthen our work around racial equity across the district. And then the last section, just to briefly share just a couple of slides around summer 2020. The way we have approached this is to think about how we can really leverage the summer in a way to have more small group and individualized support, to have a range of options and choices for families, to prioritize the needs of students that need more support, as well as to, and thinking about how we have designed this, know that summer is going to look very different, and it's not the summer that we're accustomed to. And so we're really looking at fostering community and relationships, having a specific focus around academics with the CPS program, a maximum ratio of 10 students to 1 adult, which would enable opportunities for small group and one-on-one engagement, as well as different programming across our district. When we've looked at across our different levels, summer academic programs will include opportunities that are district-wide, school-based, focus on 3 hours of remote engagement, and a capacity for over 2,100 students. And then we also think about summer as an opportunity to really sort of look at the partnership, and so continue to work with our out-of-school time partners and Department of Human Service programs of thinking about how we can support families in making connections and putting together the puzzle of support and engaging experiences for our young people. These are some just FAQs related to summer and what we have done in terms of planning. The summer programs, academic programs for CPS will be held virtually. They'll be taking place in July and August. We are sending out a communication to families at the end of this week. Families have already started, schools have already started to do the work of identifying students and their teams at the JK to 5 and upper school level. And we'll have a centralized registration for CPS programs, which is a new effort. So we're looking at some of the other kind of innovations that we might also work through, and also having an opportunity in building our out-of-school time partnerships to provide more access in terms of the data sharing, so that we can also have an opportunity to track enrollment progress and work. So with that, I am going to turn the floor over back to Madam Chair, and look forward to hearing the discussion and questions from the council.
Thank you, Dr. Salim. I also want to thank and acknowledge Dr. Turk and Ms. Spinner for their work and being here with us this evening. We've now heard from the superintendent. We'll move to questions from the Finance Committee of the City Council. I believe everyone has gotten the agenda. Just to remind folks, members of the Finance Committee will have an opportunity to ask 2 questions to the school committee, and we'll try to go around again if time permits. Please use the chat feature or the raise your hand feature, excuse me. Raise the hand feature on the screen so that I will know what the cue is. With that, Clerk Wilson, Ms. Naomi, do we have anyone signed up to speak? If not, I can work from the floor here.
I see.
Councilor McGovern, you have the floor.
All right. I never get to go first. Okay. Thank you. I want to thank the budget co-chairs, the school committee, the superintendent, your whole team, the teachers. I've been on your side of the Zoom call a few times, and I know the challenges of putting these budgets together. So I really want to thank you. And I do want to say that we discussed this when talking about the city budget. Just really the acknowledging the strong position we're in, even though we are, for us, in a financial crunch that we haven't seen in many, many years. I read 2 articles this week. Randolph, which is a city, kind of similar to Cambridge. It's a very diverse city. They have cut all music, all art, and all phys ed from all of their schools because of budget deficits. And Brookline, which is less like us demographically, but a district that people like to compare us to, are laying off 300 public school staff members. And here we are talking about, once again, how are we going to do more? So I just want to acknowledge that, and I think it's important. We can certainly debate how the money is used and everything and results, but we are in an envious position, and I'm happy that we're talking about this rather than how do we lay off 300 people. So thank you for the presentation, Dr. Salim. There's so much in there. I've got a million things I want to know about, but we'll try to keep this to budget-related questions. I guess I'm really happy to see the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging getting more money. But as Mr. Monahan said in his comments, there's lots of different ways that we can work on equity and deconstructing structural racism in our district. It's not always from a department, but it's what happens in the schools and what happens with teachers. So the two things I want to ask about in this round, I was really happy to see that there are some increases in the number of social workers. I've been banging this drum for a long time, and I'm going to continue to bang it until I see at least one full-time social worker in every school. This is something I know a little bit about professionally, and it's you can't plan a crisis, right? And if you have a half-time social worker who is there certain days a week or splitting their time between schools, and something should happen at a time when that social worker who has a relationship with a particular scholar is not there, that's not good. And so I'm happy to see that some schools are getting increases, but I'm still seeing too many 0.5s in some of our schools. So I'm wondering if you could talk about, and just quickly, the other thing is, it's hard to know because we could look at caseloads and you could say how many kids are on IEPs, how many kids are high risk, but those aren't the only kids that need help from social workers. You could have a straight A student who's not on anybody's radar, who everyone thinks is, has a great family life and everything else, and their grandmother could die, or their family could be parents could be going through a divorce and they need that support. So it's really every kid in the district could benefit at one time or another from a social worker. So where are we with that? Are we moving towards getting social workers full-time in every school?
Dr. Salimi, you have the floor.
I didn't want to disappoint you by not bringing it up again this year. So
Yeah, no, thank you, Councilor McGovern, for the question. And I think, as you see from the budget, we are moving in the direction where we, of course, are adding additional positions. As you know, this has been an approach over a number of years as we've looked at ways of strengthening areas, and even in the last number of weeks as we've talked about the COVID recovery, also added additional 2 social workers at the high school in order to provide additional support. Now we know that we're going to also need to look at how we can also have other partnerships to also leverage and augment access for students across our district. But when we did look at sort of the schools with particularly the greatest needs, that is where the full-time social workers are at this point. So previously, this year, Kennedy Longfellow was the only elementary school with a full-time social worker, and we've expanded that to the King Open, the Fletcher Maynard Academy, and the Morse. The Baldwin also has a full-time social worker now, as well as the Range Ave Upper Campus because of the Structured Academics program. And so, definitely hear your real strong interest, and as certainly you advocated for as mayor on the school committee around continuing to expand in that direction. But I do believe that this budget also, continues to move in that direction around expanding those types of important resources and opportunities, particularly during this time.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure others are going to ask a lot about the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. I have a couple questions on that, but I'll hold that until we come to a second round, because I want another thing that I think is important when we talk about equity and doing anti-racism work in our schools is really the number of teachers of color that we have in our schools. And Councilor Simmons, when she was mayor the first time, and I was on school committee, we filed the motion to raise the goal from 25% to 30%. And I know we're moving in that direction. I think it's a little deceiving because you have the district number, which is 25%, which I think puts us number 2, maybe behind Boston. But when you actually break that down by individual schools, it's very different. You have some schools that have many. You have Putnam Ave Upper School that has many teachers of color, and then you have other schools that have very few. And so I'm really happy to see more funding going into Project Elevate to help our paraprofessionals move sort of up the career ladder My question, though, is in terms of that program is, the hiring for teachers is school-based, and this is something that Mr. Kimbrough talked a lot about last term when he was on the committee. That there's still a lot of implicit bias in hiring, and again, not saying that anyone necessarily is doing anything willingly or whatever, but we know that there's implicit bias, and so what are we doing to make sure that these paraprofessionals who now earn their credentials and are ready to be full-time teachers, how are we ensuring that they're actually going to be hired at the school level when that process is really as it's such a local level as the school and not really at the district level?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I would say that it has become, while certainly the hiring teams still take place at the school level, and that still makes sense as a process. I would say that it is not as much a kind of isolated process from the work of the district. We have a diversity dashboard where we do share, some of the data regularly with schools as we're going to the hiring season. The Director of Academic Diversity, Ramona Jesus, works with principals and providing resumes and candidates, and as a result of his recruitment process. And I will share that as recently as this afternoon, approved the hiring of a new teacher who is part of the Project Elevate pipeline. And so it is something that folks know is a priority. And when we've done the anti-bias training with all of our admin council leaders, it's to support that. And what we're doing is trying to look at other ways of also having opportunities for all members of hiring committees. It's a little tricky. We're looking for ways because many hiring committees are comprised of family members and others for whom kind of they were already taking significant time to participate in the hiring committee. To sort of do an additional training is something that I know that our HR department is looking at. What are some effective ways of going about doing that? But I think that one of the things that it sort of underlies the numbers as well is that we are expanding the numbers of positions over the last couple of years that are typically harder to staff positions. So whether they be math interventionists or special education positions or other kind of hard to staff positions historically. And so the fact that we've still been able to also maintain this positive increase in terms of the percentage of educators of color has been a real testament to, I think, just a real focus, and it's something that we talk about a lot, with our team, with our principals, and certainly with the work of hiring at every level.
Okay. Thank you. And so those are, I guess I only get two, but a quick, Madam Chair, point of personal privilege, because I don't know if it'll get around to me again. I just want to give a shout out and a thank you to Barbara Allen and Marianne McDonald, who are retiring. I'm not going to be at the school committee meeting, obviously, for their final meeting, so this is my shot. I've worked with them both professionally and personally for a really long time, and they're stars, and I wish them the best. And so I just wanted to publicly thank you for your work, and good luck with your golf game, and I'll miss you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor McGovern yields the floor. We now go to the following counselors are in queue: Counselor Zondervan, Counselor Nolan, Counselor Toomey. So we'll now hear from Counselor Zondervan. Counselor Zondervan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to Mr. Salim and his staff. Thank you for this budget and the presentation. My first question is really around the Office of Equity and Inclusion, which is definitely a great initiative. But I'm a little bit confused about the staffing and the funding. It's a little bit unclear to me how that's being done exactly, because it looks like we're creating 3 positions, but then your presentation just now said 7, only one of which is a fully funded new hire. So if you could just clarify that a little bit.
Dr. Salim.
Sure, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. So the as we developed this proposal around the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging, one of the things that has been something I've tried to keep at the center is this idea that I didn't want to create an office that was fully prescribed in terms of what the structure and core pieces of that were, because I think a big part of the sort of the barriers to equity that we've been talking about is the idea around having real community stakeholder voice, particularly thinking about our families and caregivers of color, students and educators of color. And so there has been, admittedly, this, I think, healthy tension as we have gone through the budget process and developing this office, and what I have tried to identify really as discretionary dollars that then could be allocated in different ways based on how this office develops, again, in partnership with stakeholders across our community. And so, so in addition to the positions, there are a total of combining general funds as well as grant funds, as well as funds that come from other departments, about $470,500 that are sort of considered discretionary for this office. What I've done as part of this process is to spell out how these dollars could be utilized, particularly to support efforts that I've heard as proposals from the Educators of Color Coalition, from a family caregiver of color coalition that's emerging, as well as a number of different areas, like some of our work that we've talked about in terms of equity audits, restorative justice training, as well as support in the social emotional mental health space as well. With regard to the positions, so the three positions that you're referring to are positions that are specifically in the specific sort of racial equity domain of the office. There are these two other ones that include family engagement and social emotional learning, and so those are where the kind of the additional four come from, because there's a as part of the proposal, also the or as part of the budget, the director of family engagement, or which is a principal and assignment position that Robin Harris is in, a new family engagement specialist position as well. So those are some of the other roles that are part of the budget. And so there's sort of two pieces. There's the staffing piece, which is about $335,000, and then there's the discretionary dollar piece as well.
Councilor Zondervan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm still confused. Are we hiring 3 new people and the other 4 are existing positions that we're moving into this office? Are we hiring 7 new people? Can you help me understand exactly what's happening?
Dr. Salim?
Yes, so we're in the office of, so there's the Chief Equity Officer, which is a new position. There's a second position in that office, and then there's the Incident Reporting Specialist. So those are 3 new positions. There is a new position that is the Director of Family Engagement that has been filled, so I've appointed Robin Harrison to that position. There's a Family Engagement Specialist position that is new. So those 5 positions are new, and then there are 2 additional social workers that are district-wide that make up then the total of 7.
Councilor Zondervan?
Thank you. So all 7 are new positions except for Principal Harris, which you've already filled. And then are all the 3 in the racial equity, are all the 3 positions funded in the budget for the entire year? Because it didn't read to me that way.
Yes, they are. And just to clarify, there are 5 new positions. There are and 2 and 2 are existing social workers that are district-wide.
Councilor Zondervan.
I'm sorry, and then the 3 positions, sorry, the piece that I do need to clarify is the 3 positions that you're referring to, the Chief Equity Officer and the Incident Reporting Specialist, are funded full year. What we've done is, as part of our reallocation around recovery planning dollars, the second position in the Equity Office, we are going to be hiring in January. Because we also recognize that once we hire a Chief Equity Officer, there's going to be some time that is needed. So we anticipate that that time is going to, we're going to be able to have some of those savings from that delayed, not delayed, but basically just later hiring.
Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, I certainly understand and appreciate that it may take till January to hire the second position, but it's also possible that it happens sooner. So I guess similar to our overall city budget, I'm not a fan of the partial allocations that we're doing here. So my preference would be that we fully fund all the positions that we're anticipating for the year. My second question is that I've heard from a lot of parents that the online learning transition is really not working out, and that families are struggling trying to run a school in their house while in many cases doing their jobs from home. And certainly appreciate that we're all struggling with the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, but as we start to head into the summer and into the fall, it's very concerning that we're not clear on what's going to happen and how we're going to ensure that our students get the education that we're paying for, because at this point, it's my understanding that that's not happening. And as we get into the fall, it would be very concerning if that continues. So if you could say a little bit more about how we are preparing for that and what the real likelihood is that we will be returning to some kind of normal school attendance in the fall.
And just to remind my colleagues and in your answer, Dr. Salim, we're doing this in the context of the budget. Dr. Salim?
Sure, thank you, Madam Chair. Just I'm sort of shifting in my mind, sort of thinking about in the specific budget context the question. I mean, certainly, this transition has been an enormous challenge for everyone, and as there are many of these, sort of making the shift into distance learning for educators and families and students has been a huge challenge, across our system and our whole Commonwealth and across the country. And what we're doing this summer as part of our recovery planning is to really focus around, a few key areas: distance learning, and social emotional mental health as a second key area. And then thirdly, related to those, is also how we're also supporting families. And because, I've also heard from many families who feel like they, are being, asked to be their children's teacher. And that's particularly true, at the JK to 2 level with our youngest learners, where, screen time is, not the most optimal way of engaging. And so, there are a lot of, real serious challenges that we don't have all of the answers to, but we're really trying to work on elevating some of the things that we have learned, and that folks that have had practices that have been.
You may leave in a few minutes.
Okay, so you don't have to. Sorry, excuse me 1 second.
Okay.
Why don't you take care of that? Vice Chair Bowman wants to speak to this. Vice Chair, you there?
I'm here. Thank you very much. I just wanted to be intentional about just talking about the district-wide plan, although the remote learning plan, although that's not directly connected to the budget. In a committee meeting we had last night, we did pass a motion to do a review of the implementation of our plan as it relates to how we've been able to engage parents in the context of pre-recorded videos as well as real-time learning opportunities. And so we recognize that there have been differences as it relates to how the plan was implemented across the district. And when we get that information back, we'll be able to leverage that as we go into the fall, recognizing that there's a high probability that there will be rolling closures based on upticks in COVID cases. But I just want to clarify that because to say that we don't have a plan in place is not necessarily completely accurate, but we do recognize that there's been differences as it relates to the implementation of some of these plans and the rollout of some of those plans. And we're looking to make sure that we have continuous improvement so we can meet the needs of our scholars. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Is the superintendent back?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I had to make sure they didn't turn the alarm on me. So in terms of how we're thinking about also augmenting, based on what the technology distance learning tool needs are of educators, working with our ICTS department to create modules so that folks can, who may not have as strong experience with some of these tools, we're really using this time to be able to bolster those. I think also, just as I mentioned briefly, we are planning for different scenarios. There could be situations where we have the full closure that we're in right now. It could be a case where there's something more of a hybrid, where some students are in school and some students are out of school. And so there are different instructional approaches that will also come into play as we think about those different scenarios.
Thank you. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello?
I can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I'm not quite hearing an answer to my question. I'm just left with complete uncertainty. Are we planning to open the schools or not? Are we expecting that the schools will open or not? I recognize that you're planning for different scenarios, but at some point, relatively soon, we need to give some clarity to our families as to what they should expect for the fall, to the best of our ability to do that. And if we're going to continue in some kind of distance learning, we will need to make a lot of improvements because it's really not working. And I'm not saying that you don't have a plan or that anybody's not doing everything they possibly can to make it work. But the hard reality is that it's just not working for our kids. So, I don't expect a different answer, so I'll yield the floor, but look forward to clarity as soon as that is possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Zondervan. Councilor Zondervan yields the floor. Councilor Nolan, the floor is yours. I know it, and I just want to say I know it's very difficult to kind of talk in the scope and in relation to the budget, but this is a budget hearing. I do hope, and I look forward, and I know the mayor has committed to have a roundtable so we can take a deeper dive into other discussions, but I want us to use our time wisely. So please endeavor to stay focused on the budget. Councilor Nolan?
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
I don't think I've spoken through my mask into a microphone, so
it's great.
If I'm not articulate or need to be talked differently, let me know. Hello, my former colleagues and the new colleagues on the school committee. I did send a few questions/comments in advance because I thought that might be helpful. So I will start with one of them, which is the question of there's a budget for an additional research person, which is half grant funded, I understand, and half, it sounds like, from the general budget. And so this general question is, how is it that we are evaluating our programs, and how is it that we're actually using our budget to ensure that we know what's working? So I would welcome this expenditure if there's evidence in the rest of the budget document that there have been comprehensive evaluations of areas of failure and evaluations of the hallmark programs designed to address ongoing achievement issues. For instance, there was supposed to be an evaluation of Level Up to ensure that we're delivering on the promise to raise expectations, so I don't know if that analysis has been done and what it showed. I would have hoped for an independent review, but even if there wasn't that, numbers such as success in 10th grade honors by demographic group would be critically important. Another example is there's a budget priority initiative to add literacy interventionists for English language learners at 2 of the upper schools, Ringe Ave and Vassal Lane on page 10, and yet there's not a mention of an area that is equally important, which is at 2 of the other 2 middle schools, there's been, and especially high needs students, there's a very low achievement in math. Both schools' math achievement percentile for high needs was below the 20th percentile, by far the lowest in the district. And there wasn't really an analysis or even acknowledgement of why and how to address it. And especially since those schools were among the first to detrack math, and yet to have the most troubling results for all subgroups for the achievement percentile in both 2018 and 2019, I would have expected intervention and discussion of that. And an example of, in the book we heard about the 8th grade math, which we know, but if we're not addressing clearly the issues, 29% overall of 8th graders in math met expectations for African American, but in one school it was 7% of African American students, in another school is 59%. Same thing with economically disadvantaged. One school was 14%, one was 56%. In Hispanic Latino, same thing. One school was 13%, another was 82% met expectations. So we don't fix problems if we don't acknowledge them, and I'm concerned that throughout the budget, in putting together these budget areas, it didn't seem to match what it is that we know where those issues are. The summer programs sound great, but Camp Summit didn't have the results that would have expected. Now, I think one hypothesis, which I mentioned at the time, was that it didn't follow the best practice of ensuring that only the most effective teachers were hired, as opposed to just hiring people who were available. I think we really have to monitor. I'm glad the vice chair mentioned monitoring the effectiveness of the the transition to online learning. I think check-ins with every single student at a minimum every week. I have I've talked to a number of people in districts across the state. That seems to be a minimum of making sure that you are checking in every week at least, if not a couple times a week. So if we don't have a sense of how we're going to monitor that, the relationship, the achievement is not going to be what it needs to be. Another example, which I mentioned to you all, was that, for years, CPS has spent 4 times the state average on a per pupil basis on professional development. And yet, again, I didn't see anything in this budget reflecting how it is that we're going to demonstrate effectiveness of that investment. We're just continuing to pour money into it. We really need to be much clearer, and I would like to hear from you about how evaluation is being done, how specific measures of accountability, not just intention, will be accomplished. And I was glad, for instance, to see the superintendent mention that the Office of Equity Inclusion would not, we recognize we don't want to do siloing, and yet all the research shows that pushing accountability and staff to the school level is the best and most effective way to achieve results and to ensure that equity is across the district. So I think overall what I'd like to hear is how is it that we can be assured that in this budget the decisions are being driven by an evaluation of programs, and are we willing and able to evaluate our own programs? Because if not, I think instead of hiring yet another person to do it, that money should be redirected perhaps to outside independent evaluators to ensure that we're spending this we're approaching $30,000 a student. And we all know we're sitting here with results that that we keep saying will get better, and yet it hasn't happened yet. So that's my first question, which I know I sent you in advance, so hopefully we have some answers.
Dr. Salim.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. So first, just specifically around the position. So this was a position that is partly grant funded by the Biogen Foundation. And so it's actually looking also at how we can help to evaluate participation in some of the STEM programs that our students are engaged in, and also program participation, so that we can also augment how we're using Aspen to be able to track student participation in different programs, including out-of-school time programs. That's something that we have not had an opportunity to really emerge and use, and I think it also lends itself to be more effective case management. We are, as we have put together our budget proposals here, they are informed by how we are looking at results from our outcomes and data, and so making decisions based on that. The interventionist piece, so this has been in some ways similar to the discussion around social workers, a multi-year effort over a number of years. As you probably remember, we've also invested in math interventionists at the upper school, and some of those interventionist investments have been at a higher level at a couple of schools more than others. We also do leverage Title I dollars as part of investing additional supports for what we're doing. In terms of the sort of overall program evaluation, so we do look at this as a multi-year process, and thinking about one of the things that we're doing is participating in something with DESE around a program evaluation pilot. And actually, one of the things that was part of that was looking at Level Up. Unfortunately, that was interrupted by the closure process, and so that has been put on hold. But that program evaluation pilot is something that we and a handful of other districts are participating in across the Commonwealth. In the adopted budget as well, you see there also are efforts to look at the RISTA program, so a specific focus on looking at evaluation of some of the outcomes and other aspects as part of that program as well. So generally, we try to kind of move this, really kind of have this improvement mindset and thinking about how we are assessing this approach. While the for example, even with the Summit program from last year, also used some of the we actually did see also some positive results for students in terms of some of the math supports they also had received. Also looking at how we can leverage that as part of our summer planning for the summer.
Councilor Nolan.
Thanks. I guess I was hoping to hear, so what will be different? And specifically, we know math at the upper schools at a couple, when you have 7% in one school and 59% in another, or 14% of economically disadvantaged in one school and 56%. I mean, did I miss it? I didn't see anything that was different about how it is that we're going to address those very specific ongoing problems, which can be addressed. So maybe I missed it, but.
Well, I think it's the focus on instructional improvement and real focus around upper school math has been on specific mathematical instructional practices, on ambitious instructional routines, on drawing on effective practices that have been born out of the research, and to utilize strategies like Math Talks, and then also thinking about the pipeline of students coming in from the elementary level as well. A lot of the work that we're doing this year around the math intervention was a specific focus on that.
Yeah, I want it to be successful. And you've heard this from me before, Dr. Salim. It's still a passion. Again, it's wanting it to be successful and really encouraging more specific, intentional in those, and acknowledge those problem areas, because part of the problem is we know if we don't. All right, I'll go on to the next question, which is and this is in the context of the budget, Chair Simmons, and which is in that question of how are we using our outcomes measures, again, to direct our budget spending. And I sent you an email explaining how uncomfortable I am to have this budget before us that doesn't actually have any outcomes measures whatsoever for the next year. The ones that I helped pass have expired this year. They're were for 2017 to 2020. The next school year is 2021. And it needs updating and change. And will this, I guess the overarching question is, will this budget get us to outcomes that are high across the board? Are we committing 100% to saying that our outcomes measures are the same for all kids? Because last year, the outcomes measures expectation was that less than half of third graders who are Black, Hispanic, economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, or English language learners would meet expectations, while 80% of white and Asian third graders would. And as I wrote to you, as former school committee member Lawrence Kimbrough and former CPS teacher Dr. Parker reminded us all, that is literally putting in writing lower expectations, which I pledged when I talked to them about it a year ago, that I would never again vote for disparate expectations. It is the definition of growth mindset for us to send the message that we believe all kids can achieve. So, and I think it's doable. I actually have faith, but I do think we need to ramp it up, take it as an urgent message. This era that we're in should make it unacceptable for us not to use that equity lens of this budget to say every single thing that we're looking at in the budget needs to say that we know we can achieve those outcomes for all kids across the board, not just in, I mean, what it would mean is that for existing kindergartners, current in kindergarten, we're only talking 500 kids, less than half of whom would need this intervention. That's a couple hundred kids who in 3 years we have to commit to saying they are going to be on grade level in 3 years by the time they get to third grade, which is a marker. And while I agree that the lower schools also have a real role to play in ensuring that our 8th grade math goals are met, let's remember that the current outcomes were lower than they were 12 years ago. In 2008, we expected all students to read at grade level. In the math, the district used to aspire in writing to have every 8th grader successfully complete algebra before high school, and today we expect less than half to do that. So I want to hear whether this budget is ready and prepared to say that we are going to have outcome measures that are the same for every single kid, whether it's my kid and looks like me, or whether if it looks like the range of students that are before us.
Dr. Salim?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. So certainly, we've had some discussions in the last term of the school committee on this question around outcomes and targets and adjustments when there are certain targets that have been met, as well as this question around how targets are set. And I certainly hear your point and passion around the point, and I know that you know that when we did set these targets originally as part of the district plan, what we used was information from the state around what they had identified would be ambitious but attainable targets. And so that concept of ambitious and attainable was based on an analysis of all students across the state, and where there had been the districts or schools that have made the most significant progress for students along demographic groups. But I hear the point, and I think the committee has started to have this emerging conversation around what we do communicate when we actually set these outcomes. I will say that our revision of the district plan was interrupted by the closure. We had a retreat with the school committee back in February, and had hoped to follow it up. And that is a really important discussion and decision that I know that I'll be engaging the committee with as we think about outcomes and targets as part of also our recovery plan. Because we also know that because MCAS wasn't administered this year, that we're also going to have to look at different measures as we think about measuring our progress during this period of time. Absolutely hear the point. I know that we've had some, again, just sort of beginning conversations with the committee about this, but it is an important area to continue to explore and make decisions around.
Thank you, Dr. Salim. Vice Chair Bowman, did you want to say something on this?
I did, and to my former colleague, Councilor Nolan, I just want to fully acknowledge that, we are at the end of our planning of the district plan, and as Dr. Salim spoke, that COVID-19 has had an impact on the operations of school committee, as well as just the district in general. And there are certain things that we weren't not able to move forward that we will be moving forward in the future. So I want to just fully acknowledge that I appreciate you mentioning the end of our district plan. And as a committee, we have to come up with new ones. We, of course, disagree as it relates to academic, the way in which we view our scholars as it relates to what they're able to achieve and not achieve as it relates to how these outcomes are set. But want to honor the fact that we are going to move forward as a committee to make sure that we have a new 3-year plan in place as we move forward with managing the impacts of COVID on the school district.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank
Council Nolan,
Yeah.
was that your last question? Are you yielding the floor?
For now, but I just want to make a quick comment that I totally agree. I know and I appreciate that COVID-19, as Vice Chair Bowman just mentioned, has been a challenge. However, I will say some of those goals, the 3-year goal was met in 1 year. That says to me, in fact, they were not ambitious goals. They were not ambitious enough. We don't have to wonder what message that sends to kids. We know that growth mindset is out there, and when we're literally putting in writing that kids who look like me, we expect to perform differently than kids who don't look like me. And yes, those might have been state goals. We are spending $29,000 a student. That is double the state average. If we can't blast through and have 100% proficiency for all kids, then we should give it up. Like, we shouldn't be spending that much money. So I just want to push back some to say, because I fought at that time, I have said for 10 years that we should have 100% of kids graduate past algebra in 8th grade. Remember, most kids coming to CPS, whether it's from a charter school or an independent school, they have finished algebra successfully in 8th grade, and that's a range of kids, and yet most of ours are not. So,
and I think you make very valid points, Council Nolan.
I yield the floor. Sorry, I'm just so passionate about
That's where I was going with that. Councilor Toomey, you now have the floor, followed by Councilor Jivan Sobrina Wheeler.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. First of all, I want to thank the superintendent and his staff for having prepared this budget. I particularly want to commend the 5 new school committee members on the preparation of the first budget. And Mayor, this was her 3rd budget, but this is the first budget that she helped actually prepare. So I commend those new members for this presentation tonight. I remember my first budget when I was elected to the school committee. I was the co-chair with Fran Cooper, and we actually had to present a budget with a couple $1 million in cuts. So certainly times have changed, and we are very fortunate that those days hopefully are behind us. We were fortunate when we came to the City Council in this chamber. The City Council acted very responsibly and taught me a lesson and restored everything that we cut. So that was quite a lesson. So, but I do appreciate all the hard work that's gone into this budget. I have 2 questions. The first one to Dr. Salim. One of the slides you showed, it said it's a 17.6% chronically absent students. Is that, did I read that correctly? 17.6 chronically absent students in our system?
Mr. Superintendent?
Yes, so 17.6%, yes, that is the percentage from 2019.
Well, to me, that is totally unacceptable. And I guess my further question is, what are we doing to make sure that's down to 0? I mean, 17% of kids absent every day in the system is, to me, is astounding. And whatever it takes to make sure that those students get to school, whether there's a staff member going to that home every morning to make sure that child is prepared to go to school.
So,
I'm sure you've been addressing it, but to me, 17.6%, I almost fell over my chair here when I saw that slide. So,
yeah,
and that wasn't even one of my questions, but I had to raise that because that concerns me that much.
So I just need to be clarify. That doesn't mean that 17.6% of students are absent every day. What it means is 17.6% of students have missed 10% of more days in the school year, which is still, obviously too high, but it does not mean that that many students are out any given day.
But that's a couple hundred students that are missing 10 more days of school here. So, I mean, is there a pattern? Is it the same students? I'm not sure of that information, but is it those students identified that it seems that it might be the same students and that are being absent?
Yeah, so part of the work that has been happening is to really kind of share reports around attendance regularly, so that school-based teams can review and create a plan to communicate earlier and daily with families when students are absent. At the high school extension program, there's been an effort specifically around specific personalized plans around attendance. And so what we've done is we've done also weekly reports to all schools on daily attendance and chronic absenteeism data with historical data to provide tools to schools.
Thank you. I would just assume then that if there is a pattern of a family, that obviously there might be additional resources that would have to be provided to those families to make sure, there might be other issues in that household that the school department should be aware of, and if they need more services, those families, I think it's imperative that we follow through on that. My other concern is when looking at the school enrollment by race and ethnicity, there are 7 schools that are above 45% are white, and we have one school that's 86% non-white, and I'm just curious, and one school that's 61% white, and just curious in 2020 how those figures mesh with school desegregation. And I mean, one school 86% non-white, one school 61% white, and why? How was that allowed? And I'm not saying that it ties into the achievement gap, but certainly the achievement gap is a concern of all of us. But those numbers really astounded me. The 7 schools are 45% or more white, one 61%, and one 86% non-white.
So, Councilor Toomey, your question as it pertains to the budget is, what funds are being allocated to balance the schools more? I'm trying to.
Well, I thought the policy that we would have all of our schools somewhat integrated. 86% non-white students in one school, to me, is not saying that that school is desegregated. So, unless the policy has changed, but that's a glaring figure to me. In one school, 61% white.
So I believe Councilor Toomey is asking a non-budget question, which is why the schools are out of balance. I hope that you try to answer it within the budget as best you can. Superintendent Salim.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm thinking about just the framing of the response. So, I think as we think about just sort of the different demographic makeups across our school system and just different needs that exist, that exist at school based on kind of high needs measures that we use to make decisions around Title I allocations and others. We have in Cambridge, as everyone knows, a controlled choice system. We do not use race as a measure or as a factor for assigning students, but instead it's socioeconomic status. So whether families identify as eligible to pay lunch for lunch or not. And that is how the assignment's made. And so it is a result of that choice program that results in the demographic makeup. And then based on that and based on individual school needs, we make different budgetary decisions to provide additional supports for schools that may have greater need, for example, a higher percentage of students with disabilities or a higher percentage of English language learners in their schools.
Thank you, Councilor Salim. Councilor Toomey.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Certainly don't want to debate this issue tonight, but I really don't accept the explanation that just was given. And so is the school that's 86% non-white getting like double resources of the other schools to assist those students?
Dr. Salim?
No, when I go further and looking at the budget to see how much the money resources sent to that school compared to other schools, you're telling me I'm going to see a greater increase or a greater percentage of funds into that school in resources than other schools.
Dr. Salim?
Yeah, so the way additional resources are typically, or the framework that we use is looking at the high needs population and also socioeconomic status. And so, Title I dollars are also allocated on top of general fund dollars to support schools. So additional interventionists or reading specialists or other roles are also provided to those specific schools.
Councilor Toomey.
Again, I'm going to delve more into this, but I believe when I did a first look at the socioeconomic, I'm not sure that the schools are showing equity across, that all schools is showing the same percentage economic equity there. In 1982 is when, Cambridge entered into the voluntary desegregation plan, so maybe that's no longer gone in effect, but that was, I believe in 1982, Cambridge did it voluntarily so that we weren't forced to into a desegregation plan by the Commonwealth. But I will certainly pursue this, and like I say, again, to me, looking at this on the face of it shows some inequities in the distribution here, so that really concerns me.
Councilor Toomey, are you yielding the floor? Councilor Toomey yields the floor. Councilor Jivan Sabrina Wheeler, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I want to thank the school committee and the superintendent for all their deliberation on this budget and just the work that's gone into the last couple months as so much of the school year has changed. I'm sure it's a Herculean effort. So thank you for all you've done. I wanted to start by asking about the school district's relationship with the city's police department, which is, of course, tied into the anti-racism discussion that CPS has been having. As I'm sure you're aware, the Minneapolis Public Schools severed its contract with the Minneapolis Police Department for school resource officers this week after the killing of George Floyd, and is going to be figuring out alternatives to guarantee public safety for its students. And a lot of the conversation over the last week and even before has been, how do we shift away from policing by addressing root causes and funding safety via alternative means? In reading through the budget, I understand that Cambridge's school resource officers are funded actually on the city side of the budget. But given that I'm sure the school district is involved in these decisions, and that all our job as policymakers is often to figure out how to be proactive rather than reactive when it comes to these issues, has the school district ever talked about shifting away from the model of school resource officers from the police department and towards other approaches to public safety?
So, Dr. Salim, in the context of the budget, my colleague wants to know if you're thinking about using your resources, financial resources, away from police, would you say resource officers, Councilor, to?
Yep. Yeah, from funding public safety, which I know is part of the school district budget, so that city police resource officers were needed.
Dr. Salim, do you understand the question?
I think so. So I think, the Cambridge Police Department, along with other agencies, are part of a multi-department effort around safety net, which I know that councilors are familiar with, and so they, along with our kind of use that as a way of providing the additional supports that we were just speaking about as well. The resource officers that we work with at the various schools, do also have, proactively kind of engage students and families. They do have I think, a very strong positive relationship with the resource officers across our schools whenever there are, whenever we've had opportunities where students have engaged in walkouts or other types of activities of protest. It is our school resource officers that are typically the ones that are on site because they do have the relationships with students. And so it's, they don't have the, I guess, their function is really around really building community relationships. They are helpful with us for doing, wellness checks and other types of supports for families across the system. Related to kind of the budget, which is maybe a bit of some connection, I think, to some of what you're asking about is, efforts also we're looking at in terms of more restorative practices related to discipline. The incident reporting specialist, that is a position to be able to have somebody for students to go to to report any, experiences with microaggressions or other racism experiences. So those are other, we see this as part of a, sort of a multi-layered system or a structure around, supporting students, and their various needs.
Councilor Sabrina Wheeler, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, and my second question, I wanted to ask about universal pre-K, which I know is a big priority for the school committee, even if it's sort of not mentioned a lot of times in the budget. And I know a lot of the conversation has been sort of a chicken or an egg going around space, and that a lot of the pre-K funding comes from the city side on the Department of Human Services. I just wanted to get a sense of where those discussions were at with this year's budget in thinking about pre-K.
Yes, Madam Chair, through you. So, as you noted, there's the city side of the budget in terms of early childhood. The pieces that are part of the CPS budget are that include our youngest learners, or things like the Special Start program for students that need specific services. That's a program that has continued to expand in numbers of classrooms across the district for a number of years now. We also, as part of the Tobin Vassa Lane project, also added an additional classroom at the projected at the new building, so that there could also be additional 3-year-old seats on that front. And we do work closely with the Department of Human Services programs, and as well as the Birth of Grade 3 partnership, where I want to say earlier this winter we had a chance to meet with providers across the system to talk about this. The report that was that we had shared earlier this year on a mixed delivery system and the planning related to that. So those are some of the things. The funding is on the city side, but there is deep collaboration. We do have staff, including Leanne Ellis, that also are part of our part of the Cambridge Public Schools, where a lot of the work as part of the Birth of Grade 3 partnership is trying to ensure as seamless a transition as possible from preschool into our JK and K programs.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. This is Co-Chair Carlone. Co-Chair Simmons will be back momentarily, so I'll be chairing the meeting for a while. And as coincidence would have it, I'm next on the list with my questions.
Co-Chair Calhoun?
Yes,
Hi, I saw that my co-chair wanted to respond, maybe.
please,
Yep.
please do.
Yeah, thank you. It's oh, can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Oh, I just wanted to make a quick comment on the school resource offices. I don't know what they do in other communities, but our school resource offices it's a nationally recognized model, and our school resource offices, as I think most people know, have some of the strongest connections to our kids. And I know Commissioner Bard could respond as well, but the incident, and those and some of those school resource offices, they instruct at the YMCA. So they're constantly keeping in touch with the young people, and it's serving as a safety net to make sure our young kids don't get into trouble. So other communities do it differently, have different roles, but Cambridge's school resource offices are an unbelievable asset to our schools and serve in a very different way than other communities. So I just wanted to make that statement. Thank you.
thank you, School Committee Member Fantini. My comments are pretty much straightforward, but first I wanted to thank Councilor Patty Nolan for her in-depth questioning. My comments related to her questions, but would not have been in such detail, and I respect that, and the responses, but clearly we have work to do. I'm very curious about what the vice chair and I believe the superintendent discussed, and that is the community meetings to discuss the budget. We and the council really don't do that. We have another method, and that is people voting for additional projects. So I would appreciate it if the vice chair or the superintendent, whoever you feel should lead the discussion, tell us about your community meetings, the feedback you heard, and the change to the budget. This intrigues the council very much, and we greatly congratulate you for pursuing that approach.
Co-Chair Calhoun, I can start, and then Dr. Celine can jump in. So from a structural perspective, one of the things that we heard from the community prior to this budget process is whenever you go into a school committee, in our school committee chamber, there's the way our budget meetings were set up, there wasn't an opportunity to actually engage and have dialogue with school committee members. It was you sign up for your 2 minutes, you get to say what you want. It kind of felt like a Christmas list, and there wasn't really a dialogue around the complexity of the all of the different demands and needs that go into a budgetary process for a school district. And so myself and co-chair Fantini decided to really take a step back and figure out, okay, let's get out of the school committee chambers first. And then second, how do we give people the information that they need so they can actively participate in the budget process? And so that's how we structured our meetings. Our school committee members sat at different tables and engaged people and had more of a dialogue than having a one-way dialogue towards us with a list of things that they want. Now, there were opportunities for growth there, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the context of COVID-19 moving forward. We would have loved to see more people participate, and we're going to work on that really hard to ensure that that happens. The second piece that we weren't able to achieve this time around, we wanted to go to either a community center or maybe one of the centers that's attached to the Cambridge Housing Authority to have our budget meetings. But it didn't work out for this time because of just the notice that we gave those different facilities. They couldn't accommodate us. So moving forward, those are the things that we're trying to put in place so we can engage a diversity of people and give them the tools needed so they can understand the complexity of the budget process. That's really about listening to multiple voices to then influence how a budget comes to us, that then gets voted upon, that then comes before this body for a vote. And I'll hand it over to Dr. Salim from there.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bowman. And I know that after I share some points, Mayor Siddiqui also would like to weigh in as well. Just more specifically around what these times look like that I think were instructive. We tried to really reduce barriers. Similar to what Vice Chair Bowman spoke about in terms of, even the barrier of coming to the school committee chambers and, stating your name and address and speaking publicly, which not everyone's comfortable with, is to have people be able to speak at tables. We had family liaisons facilitate conversations at tables. We did make childcare available. We had, we provided breakfast or lunch. And we looked at times so that we had the family-facing community session on a Saturday and in afternoons for educators. And I think we learned some from this, and we're not fully there yet. There are certainly areas for improvement as we think about the participation. I think one of the things that's interesting from this whole experience that we're on connecting within each other electronically is what are some ways that is actually maybe a way of reducing barriers for some people as well, to be able to weigh in or chime in on on making comments that they otherwise wouldn't be able to. So we also work with the community engagement team in terms of outreach, and also use it as an opportunity to give some overview around the budget, because I think to many people, I think who don't tune into meetings regularly, the budget can feel like this really opaque process. And so understanding some of the basics around how we approach and think about tying the budget to our outcomes and tying it to our priorities is something that both Vice Chair Bowman and Member Fantini wanted to make sure were a priority as we engage community members.
Thank you, Dr. Salim.
Mayor Siddiqui, did she want to follow up?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Co-Chairs. So I think it was a pilot, and I'm so glad we went ahead and did it. Just a point of information, the early January, the first one was for educators and staff, and that was about 30 participants. The families and staff one that happened later, that was about 20 participants. And so, we all talked about, we'd love more engagement. So the things to build on from what the Vice Chair said, thinking about approving our budget calendar earlier, thinking about timing to accommodate teacher schedules, thinking about, for families, can we do a weekday evening, doing additional outreach. I think something that is really important to all the committee members is language support, right, for non-English speakers. That's really key, and if we really want widespread engagement. And finally, I mentioned this in my earlier points, but thinking about for students, our school student committee members have said, get us involved. And so I think we would really love to do that in the future. So that's just what I wanted to add. Thank you.
I wanted to thank all of you, and I hope that somehow the rest of the council can learn from this, Madam Mayor, and that maybe the Finance Committee co-chairs can meet with you and talk about this in the future. My second question is more of a comment. Most people know I'm an architect and urban designer by training, and I don't see how a school district can rely on only $1.8 million in their budget for school repairs. And that's been fairly consistent. I've been on, this is my fourth term, and I understand that we're building new schools and therefore we have to control renovations, but I also know $1.8 million doesn't go very far anymore. Is that number strictly developed because we're doing new schools? Or in reality, the superintendent and school committee believe that is sufficient for existing schools? I'm not trying to be controversial here. I'm really stunned, and I would love to hear your thoughts.
So the co-chair of the school department's budget would like to respond. Mr. Fantini, can you hear me?
Oh, thank you. Oh, no, I didn't want to respond to that question, Madam Chair.
Well, then you don't have to talk.
Okay, I won't. Thank you. Thank
Who would you like to respond? The mayor or the superintendent?
Whoever feels...
So the floor is open to either the mayor or the superintendent to answer that question. But Mr. Fantini, I do want to come back to you to see what you might want to say after this response. Mr. Superintendent, did you want to respond to my colleague?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm going to ask our Chief Operating Officer, Jim Maloney, to come on to speak to that. As he's coming on, there certainly are many renovation projects that we do undergo. So outside of the with MSBA accelerated repair programs, that happen across our district. But also, a number of maintenance efforts that also happen on a regular basis. Mr. Maloney?
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. We will hear from Mr. Maloney, and I believe our city manager, Mr. DePasquale, wants to weigh in on this. So we'll go to Mr. Maloney first and then to our city manager. Mr. Maloney, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, I think it's there are several factors that go into play here. I was at your capital meeting yesterday, and I think the city manager pointed out that we've actually seen an increase in recent years, for which we're happy. Number one. Number two, we're in a position where, with the Morse roof being done this summer, all of our roofs are solid and in good shape. Same with our boilers and heating systems. We certainly, I think I can't deny that we have lots of other projects that are in the pipeline. But in addition to a money issue, there's a capacity issue. There's a capacity of management issue, and there's a capacity of where to put the students when you're doing the work. So it's not just a money issue when we talk about our capital budget. It's a management capacity, and it's also, more importantly, a enrollment and student capacity. Where do you put them? This coming year, we're going to be struggling with perhaps social distancing, depending upon guidelines that we're waiting for from the state and public health. So that's another matter. It's more than just money when we talk about this. And we appreciate your support greatly, but I think that I have to qualify that a little bit beyond just money.
Mr. DePasquale, do you want to follow up, please?
Through you, Madam Chair. That's actually a very good question, Co-Chair. But one of the ways we've addressed this is, well, there's a public investment committee which the school has a member on. But almost like fire trucks, we have taken a look at free cash to help support the school capital needs over and above the debt service for the school. So if you take a look at the last 3 years, we have put in about $12 million in other type appropriations for roofs, for HVAC, VHC, for playgrounds related to the school. So in the budget, it's increased, but we are spending annually more than the budget with free cash appropriation. So this is just another way that we have helped offset some of the issues that they've had. So I just wanted to bring that point across. But no, 1.8 would be pretty difficult, but that's why when bigger items come up, we work with Jim and Claire and usually can fund the true free cash, which then has to go to the council.
My only comment on that would be, again, there should be an asterisk that says what else is happening, because if it's a misnomer, some people are going to think, well, they're not putting money into my school, and that's not true. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Co-Chair Carlone, I believe Mr. Fantini I don't know if he wanted to speak directly to this. Mr. Fantini, you have the floor.
No, thank you. The manager said what I was going to say, so thank you. Thank you.
Very good. Council Carlone yields the floor. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Through you, I just briefly wanted to touch on something that my fellow colleague brought up earlier about the school resource officers. I certainly appreciate the question, and I think it's a conversation we definitely should have as a community moving forward. In fact, I've spoken to Member Weinstein and the mayor today around that program. The school resource officers in Minneapolis have been a problem for a decade. And so, when I think about Officer Pam and Nicole Pacheco and how much of a part of the community they are for their particular schools and the other school resource officers, as part of this conversation about whether or not to keep this program, I think we should probably think about surveys of students and past students and figure out how successful or not successful this program is. So I just wanted to say that I do think it is a very worthy conversation in the context of what's been going on, and it's something I think we should talk about as a community in the weeks and months moving forward. So to the school committee, the 5 new members, I know this was a tremendous task, particularly thrown in with a pandemic. So I applaud you for getting to this moment. I know that this budget was delayed because there was a need for you all to work together and make sure that you got the budget to a place to the city council where you felt comfortable moving forward. And I appreciate the more robust process that you went through this year to gather that community conversation and really make the budget a less opaque process. And I hope that, given that we have all been able to shift to very digital engagement tools over the past 3 months, and we did it very quickly, that, it does provide us a different opportunity to reach out to hard to reach families or non-traditionally reached families to really get input that is diverse and necessary in formulating a budget going forward. If there's a silver lining in any of this, it's that we now have different tools to engage with residents. I think I agree with Dan Monahan that, this budget is a start of a transformation. It's a step in the right direction. But I also agree with Tony Clark that it isn't quite as transformational as maybe I had hoped for in terms of the narrative and in terms of, I think one of the things I called out at the only meeting we've had, the roundtable, was that there's a lack of data. And to my colleague's earlier point, I was disappointed that there was not any data on where we're trying to get to in the next school year in terms of outcomes. I understand that there's a district plan and it was a 3-year plan and it ended in 2020. But at the same time, I don't know how we hold ourselves accountable if we don't even have any metrics to do that work. How do we, at this point next year, say, gosh, we did a great job, or really these programs didn't work because we didn't meet our goals? So, there's no goals for fiscal for school year 21. And then in the budget priorities, their progress measures they're measures that I'm not sure how we're actually going to reach. So for example, we've got a budget priority for improved instruction for language-based learning disabilities and literacy-focused staffing, which focus on those 2 big outcomes, right, that we think about: 3rd grade reading and 8th grade math. The progress measures are observable instructional improvements, and students receiving intervention or participating will see improvements on assessments measuring literacy and language acquisition. How many kids are we targeting? What kind of improvements on assessments? How will we know that these interventions were effective? So when we think about a transformational budget and a transformational narrative, that's where I feel like we need to be. I think we need to know where we're going. And then I also, I'm just thinking about what Dan Monahan said, and that the budget isn't the only lever to really think about equity in the district. We have a few opportunities with the cabinet level positions, not only with the Office of Equity that is new and hopefully will not be siloed. But we've got 3 cabinet level positions that we're filling for right now. And this is an opportunity to be transformational. And how are we looking to fill those positions with people whose lens and focus has been traditionally in their work life on equity? So that's my first question, is really around how are we using different opportunities that are presented to us, like these cabinet level positions, to fill them with transformational leaders who are thinking about equity at every step, right? So I will just use, for example, the AP exams that we had during this remote learning time. That was an opportunity for us to look at that through an equity lens, knowing that lots of our kids have poor connectivity at home. Lots of our kids don't have a quiet space at home to take a really important exam. How did we think about that through an equity lens and really be thoughtful about how to reach out to them beforehand and make sure they had a safe space, to make sure that they had great connectivity and they could pass that AP exam? That's how we're going to be transformational, when we think about every single thing through an equity lens. So another example is we've been trying to close this digital divide for years. And it turns out we just needed to get 400 kids a hotspot, and we did it, over a week. So where are those places that we can be really transformational and think about that equity piece from every aspect? So sorry if this is a very long-winded way of me asking the question. How are we thinking about those cabinet level positions that we're hiring for, and making sure that we are hiring the next level team of leaders in our district?
Dr. Salim?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, through you. So, certainly both in terms of how we have recruited for positions, as well as through the screening process, the focus around equity and racial equity in particular has been central, both through just knowing the focus around Cambridge Public Schools. So as we engaged a search firm in that process, that was something that was very clear. Secondly, in terms of our screening committees, we did expand those. We had educators of color and family caregivers of color that were part of that process, as well as other roles represented on that screening committee. And then the questions and the tasks that we have asked have had equity at the center at every stage. And so I agree with you. I mean, these are when we think about, there's the budget and the dollars, and there are other important levers as we think about advancing our district to becoming more anti-racist, and that has to be part of both how we're developing ourselves as leaders and as educators across the district, as well as being a clear priority as we are bringing on leaders in every role across our system. So that applies to, kind of our principal searches, and then also how many teams, even at the school level, as they're also interviewing classroom teachers as well, having specific questions around how they think about their own identities and support for students, and how they think about racial equity as part of their work. I know is a focus of many screening committees, across the district.
Vice Mayor Mallon.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. And just as a follow-up, I mean, these are multi-million-dollar decisions. These are folks that are going to be making over $150,000 a year. They are going to be with us. They're going to probably outlast you in this district. And so I'm curious, how many rounds of interviews and panels will a finalist go through, right? Like, is it just going to be like one round with an interview panel, and then it gets to you and you make a decision, or are there going to be multiple panels? And are there projects or research, or what are we asking these folks to do in order to make this multi-million-dollar decision and really be focused on equity?
So I hesitate to go into too much detail, just given sort of some of the processes that we have underway, but it is both sort of interview processes as well as other tasks that we also ask candidates to complete to try to get as complete a picture, and of course, checks, reference checks with others in terms of what their experiences have been in their current and previous roles. So all of that, I think we've had an in-depth and robust process around the screening process that is currently still underway.
I believe the vice chair of the school committee wants to speak a little bit to this, Vice Chair Bowman.
Yes,
You have the
yes,
floor.
thank you. I just wanted to go back to Councillor Mallon's point around our being a data-driven district and really committed to our district-wide plan in the context of this school year. And I just want to, for the public's sake, just put some perspective around this. We knew that an outgoing committee where a significant amount of our body would be transitioning out and a new set of members would be coming into our school committee. And so we intentionally wanted to engage our new members on setting some of those targets as it relates to our 3-year plan. And then COVID hit. And so at that point, we started to have some staffing challenges in our office. And at one point, we did not have staffing within our school committee office. So that had an impact on the things that we need to prioritize. And the priority was getting this budget before the council. We fully recognize there is a body of work that was put on the side because there was we had to prioritize. And so I just don't want the public to think in any way, shape, form, or fashion that this school committee, as well as our leadership, is not committed to being data-driven. One new thing in this budget book is our district-wide goals and outcomes. They're actually in the book now, and that has not been a practice before this point. And the reason that we did that is because we want transparency. We want people to know that the dollars in which we voted upon, how it's directly connected to the academic achievement as it relates to our priorities and the district plans and our goals and objectives, that those things are clearly tied together and people can see that in one place. And so I just wanted to make sure that the public, as well as make sure that you know that we are definitely committed to being a data-driven committee. And we look forward to working as a body to move forward with identifying what the next set of goals and targets will be for our district-wide plan as we move forward with this new committee. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Thank you, and thank you to the Vice Chair for explaining that. I do agree that the priority is the budget, but the budget is the roadmap that tells us where we're going. And it's also a good look back and trying to figure out, did we get there? Did we meet our goals? To not see any expectations for school year 21 about where we want, particularly the grade 3 reading and the grade 8 math, where we have identified those as, real goals on where we want to get to. I don't see where we're going. So, that was my point. I understand that we're a data-driven district. I know that we do a tremendous amount of assessments. I'm just not seeing it in this book. So thank you to the superintendent for explaining the process on the hiring of the cabinet level positions. And I hope that we really do some deep work and make sure that we are hiring the best people to handle some of this really tricky stuff that we've been trying to handle for a long time around equity, around our achievement gap. So just my next question is around RISTA and the career pathways review and study that we've allocated $75,000 in the budget to make sure that we do. And I'm very excited to see this allocation because I think this is something we really need to do. A number of us went to Minuteman Regional Vocational High School back before COVID hit, and it was a real revelation in what our kids could be exposed to outside of RISTA, right? So those programs that we don't offer on site at RISTA, but we also, we really need to look at what is available on site at RISTA, and is it is it as robust as it needs to be? Are they the programs that we need and want and are, you know, in the 21st century? What those jobs are, what's available. So when will that study be underway and when will it be completed?
Dr. Salim.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to ask Deputy Superintendent Dr. Turk to speak to this because I know that there was an initial launch meeting that happened around the review to, I think, look at some initial research questions.
Dr. Turk, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Yes, as Dr. Salim just stated, a group of us recently met within probably the last 2-week window to begin to gather some initial information that we will need in terms of being able to write a scope of services. And the information also needs to be aligned with some of the work or the requirements rather of the Department of Elementary Education that also completes reviews of all of the career and technical education programs across the state. So one of the things that not all people are aware of is that in terms of being able to either add a program or delete a program from an existing site, that there does need to be some work around some of the pieces that were just mentioned by you, Vice Mayor, in terms of what are the job outlooks, what is the feasibility of being able to implement a program at the current site. I'll use as one example, because I know there has been some interest on the part of some of our students who have asked about programs that focus in on veterinary work. And in most cases of schools that have that as an opportunity, there is also an environment where the institution is able to have animals on site. And so that may not necessarily be something that we are able to do, although there is an interest. So there are definitely several pieces to this in terms of preparation to be able to have the evaluation, but that is in process, and we would expect it during the first part of the new school year to be able to have that proposal out and available so that the evaluation would be able to start perhaps late fall, perhaps in the late fall area. I would say that.
Thank you, Dr. Turk. Vice Mayor?
So starting in the late fall, Dr. Turk, and then how long do you think that, I know it's hard to say without an RFP and a scope, but like 6 months, a year, 4 months?
And you are correct. I mean, it is somewhat difficult to say, and I would not want to make a commitment on the floor that is then outside of what is actually put together. What I can use as a measurement, however, is that when we have participated in reviews with the Department of Education, they typically run a few months. And so I would suspect that with an outside agency as well, that it would still be in that area of a few months.
Vice Mayor?
Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Turk, for speaking to that. I mean, I think we have currently an agreement in place where our students can access within a network programs that aren't actually available on site at RISTA. It's not heavily used. And just to speak to your veterinary services conversation before, Minuteman was starting a veterinary services because it is such a hot topic, an area for a lot of students, and environmental sciences. I mean, I really hope that we can enter into an agreement with Minuteman to send our students for programs that don't exist and won't exist after the study is done on site at RISTA, because I think our kids would really love the opportunity to experience that school and the offerings that it provides. I mean, it's really, really, really impressive, and it runs the gamut. And Rista can't do it all, and it does not seem like the program that we use to go outside is something that is being utilized in any way that's effective. So I just want to throw that out there. I really loved the Minuteman program. I'm glad that we're doing this work with Rista and really taking a look at what we need and what our kids need and what the community needs. So I'll yield the floor at this time, but thank you again to the school committee, to the vice chairs for putting this budget together under such a tremendous strain during a pandemic, brand new members, doing it all online. I know how many meetings you guys have been at. I've been at almost all of them myself. But I commend you for persevering and getting to this place. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield the floor.
I believe, but I'm not sure, let me ask, did the Vice Chair want to weigh in on this? Madam Vice Chair?
No.
No? Very good, okay. The Vice Mayor yields the floor. I have a few questions in this round, and then I'll see if members want to go through again. Just very quickly, I was very pleased to see in the budget detail in the very back of the book, so the addendum, the first thing I look for three things: family liaisons and around equity and inclusion. Those are my top areas of interest. So I was very pleased to see that the family liaisons are full-time in the schools. That's a great thing. I did see a little inequity from school to school, and I wasn't sure if that was because some schools were using their school improvement money, or it was because some family liaisons were there longer than others. I wasn't sure. But what I walked away with was that the family liaison the family liaison makes $46,658. That's the average or the starting. And I worked for the school department for a very short time, and it was as a parent liaison before we had the good sense and knowledge to change the word parent to family so it would be more inclusive, which we did in the 1990s, and I was proud to be a part of that. But when you looked at the 46.6, and I'm not great at math, so someone can correct me if I'm wrong, it's about $15 an hour that we're paying our family liaisons. This is what stands out. We've put $335,254 into this new idea, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And Dr. Salim knows anything about me, buzzwords make me crazy. And so I don't know what the belonging means. You don't have to describe it to me now. I think, if anything, I walk away from this finance hearing with is that we do have to have an opportunity, and I know the mayor's committed to doing it, of having a roundtable so we can just talk about our shared interests, hear more about what the school committee is doing, and maybe get a better idea of what equity, inclusion, and belonging really mean. But that being said, the family liaisons that are in schools now, first full-time for however long that took, making about $15 an hour. And for those of us that have spent time working on issues of pay equity, know that a living wage is closer to $25 an hour and not $15 an hour. So where I'm very happy to see, well, I'm not going to say I'm happy to see about the equity, inclusion, and belonging, because I don't understand it. I read it. I don't get it. I don't get how it applies. And I do understand, though, I'm not a policymaker on the school committee, and the school committee decides that this is something that they think is important. I'll wait to see what the outcome is. But I am troubled about the fact that I believe that we grossly underpay our family liaisons, or I should say you grossly underpay your family liaisons, who are, one, again, mostly women, that we're paying, it looks to be between $15 and $17 an hour. And I hope at some point the school committee will have a conversation about their value, the work that they do, and also think about bringing their rate of pay up higher. That's number one. Number two, I also looked at the extension program. I know that's a small cohort of students, but I also know that's a cohort of students that have a great number of needs. So I'm curious why we don't have a family liaison, even part-time. I suspect you're going to say that Greta Hardina is doing it, but Greta Hardina, who does an extraordinary job, is at the high school, and that's a huge population. So I'd like to hear the superintendent, what the thinking is that there's not a family liaison at the extension program. And then lastly, before I just let go of this item around equity and inclusion, so we have the equity, inclusion, and belonging, 335,254. We have building equity bridges, which I know that's a grant that's going away, which is 65,000. And it's just not clear how, I cannot connect the money to the work and the work to an outcome. And it may not be something that we can answer tonight. So this is more saying to my colleagues on the school committee, I look forward to an opportunity, particularly around issues of race, class, equity, and diversity, to have a real conversation around where we are going as a city, and then also get a better sense of having the discussion about what the intent, beyond what's in the book, on this equity, inclusion, and belonging. And then lastly to that is I do see Raymond De Jesus. I was not able to find him in the book, but I'm hoping that in all of this race work, that the work that he's doing around recruitment and retention is held harmless and doesn't get diminished, because I think he's extraordinary. I think he does extraordinary work. I'm very sad to see that Barbara Allen is going, because what an awesome team of individuals really trying to deliver the goods and services to our scholars and their families in the district. So my question, after that long preamble, is what's the thinking around the low pay of the family liaisons? Why isn't there one at the high school extension program? Mr. Superintendent. Or Dr. Turk.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So as you've seen as part of the budget, we expanded the number of hours for upper school liaisons to match the elementary liaisons, which actually is a 30-hour work week. And so the hourly rate is actually closer to 40 per hour when you do that. We are governed by the actual collective bargaining agreements that we have with the liaison unit. That does determine what those.
So you're saying the liaisons are getting $40 an hour?
I believe that if the year schedule is about 188 days and the work week is 30 hours per week, then yes, on average, I think there's still steps that exist in the contract.
You give them more hours, sir, because if it's coming out to $46,000, to me, it's still underpayment. I'm not going to belabor that issue, but I think you get my point.
So there is a range, yes, but I hear you talking about sort of the overall piece there. In terms of the high school extension, so it is, as you know, a program that for the number of students has a higher proportion of staff, and so there are a number of staff members that serve that kind of family outreach role. Including the clerk, Ashley Goodwin, that actually joins the family liaison group or when they have their regular meetings. So that high school extension program clerk, as well as the counselor at high school extension program, do engage in that work. And I will ask Dr. Turk to speak a little bit more about the types of things that these roles do as part of family engagement at high school extension.
Dr. Turk?
Yes, thank you. Yes, as Dr. Saleem just mentioned, there are several educator roles and non-educator roles in the extension program that serve in a capacity that one would look at as similar to a family liaison, and that is by design. That is something that the staff has worked on together, and in fact, the model that they are using now, that they have sort of moved to within the last year under the new leadership, is one where each student is almost assigned to an individual, to an educator, so that there is an ongoing connection. And in that way, it could be looked at almost as each student having their own family liaison, a family person or person who will connect with them and their families. So they really do operate in a different kind of way. which has a very family feel to it, which sometimes those students enjoy and other times not so much, but it is effective. And as a result of it, they have been able to make some dramatic increases in terms of student and family participation in the program. I will just say one last thing as an example. When the current principal first began 2 years ago and had his first family evening, there was one family that attended the event. If you were to go to any event at this point, right up until before COVID, there are anywhere from 15 to 20 families who routinely attend events with their students, and that is both for academic and non-academic purposes.
Thank you, Dr. Turk. That's helpful to know, but it's not apparent in the budget, so it's hard to figure out. But I appreciate your answer. Again, I would say to you, Dr. Salim, and to my colleagues on the school committee, again, my concern is that we pay the liaisons equal pay for equal work, and I'm willing to certainly have maybe in one of our roundtables more of a discussion to see if that, to make sure that is happening. And then lastly, Dr. Salim, you spoke to in your earlier presentation, you talked about the achievement and access gap, and you presented us some numbers, but when I reviewed the numbers and I looked at third grade reading levels, looking at 17, 18, and 19, in 2017, all children were 54%, African Americans 37. 2018, all children 61%, African Americans 40%. 2019, all students 68%, African Americans 44%, and that was in third grade reading. And I was on the school committee when we made third grade reading a benchmark because we understood that if students weren't on grade level by third grade, that they would probably never catch up. I go further on to look at eighth grade math, and eighth grade math is a huge determinant of how successful a student's going to be, particularly in high school. And then 2017, all students 43%, African Americans 10%. 2018, all students 53%, African Americans 30%. 2019, all students 58% or 55%, African Americans 29%. As my colleague earlier said, Ms. Nolan, we're spending close to $30,000 per student, and that's an incredible figure. Now, I know you don't have 2020 figures. I know because of COVID and inability to use the usual assessments that you use to indicate where students are, you don't have that. And I'm not going to judge you on that, but I have to tell you, I'm in the same place I was last budget process, saying it's hard to explain to John and Jane Q citizens, strictly those that don't have children, and look at these numbers to see how we are underperforming in this crucial area. And here in this time where the Black community is clearly under assault, our students' ability to be successful and navigate through some of these harsh times is their ability to perform, interact, and be successful in the world. And they don't need the impediment of undereducation. And so I just raise that because it concerns me, and I have to ask myself, why is this not happening? And I look at this in the context of the budget. And so is there a lack of accountability or low expectations, or both? It's like we go take our students on a trip where we only bring 29% of them back or 30% of them back. There's no reason that I can really understand. I mean, one thing about Cambridge is it has a lot of money, and so we have an embarrassment of riches and how we cannot do better. Yeah, so all the kids are going up, but the gap is not closing. I'm just very disappointed, and I take responsibility, and that's why I hold myself accountable, and I hold all others that are in this work, as well-intended as we may be, that we have to work harder for better outcomes. And so when I see something about equity, inclusion, and belonging, I feel like, this is another fad that we're buying, and I still haven't seen why what we were doing prior hadn't been more successful. So I just raised that. It probably doesn't warrant an answer. I think it is something that's going to take more discussion, but in the context of the budget, it's hard to look at $30,000 per pupil, and I know it's the average per pupil cost, and those kind of outcomes. To my colleagues, we could now do a second round. And in that regard, I would just using the same order. Now, if someone does not want to speak, they can yield. Councilor McGovern, is there a follow-up question that you'd like to raise?
Yes, thank you. I'm wondering if you can, an issue that came up a lot last term was around the language-based learning disabilities, and I know that the state was coming out with some mandates that hadn't come out, and we were waiting, and so if you could, I know we have in the budget more money for the landmark program. Can you talk a little bit about what we're doing in terms of early assessment, early identification, and what that funding for landmark is going to do, not just for those students who are in the self-separate classrooms, but also for kids who may not have gotten to that point, but are still struggling with language-based learning disabilities.
Dr. Salim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I'm going to ask Dr. Alexis Morgan, our Assistant Superintendent for Student Services, to speak on the landmark piece. With regard to assessments, we've had a team that's been actually reviewing our different screeners and assessment tools and looking to make those types of adjustments to be able to align more with early literacy screening with experts in dyslexia research that have been part of the work. So that's not something that is, part of the sort of specific initiative area around the budget, but it is a practice that we are adjusting for.
Dr. Alexis Morgan, you have the floor. Or
Hi,
not.
good. Yes. Can everybody hear me? Good.
Yes, we
good.
can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah, so our work with Landmark actually started last spring. We've been working with Ann Larson, supporting our two schools, starting off with Grandma Parks and Vassal Lane Upper School. Ann Larson has been meeting with both the special educators in the sub-separate and those general education teachers who are their partners. We've been doing monthly trainings. We're reviewing all of the IEPs, making sure that we target our interventions and support based upon the profile of the student. We are also revamping, we are also looking at how we are supporting our students who have more intensive needs versus students who have more or who have more of a moderate-based language-based learning disability. We're expanding that next year, continuing the work at the upper schools, and our goal for year 3 is to really develop and expand our program at the high school level. We are working not only with our school psychologists in this, but also with the building-based principals so that we can ensure continuity for students as they go across the grade levels, as they move to different subject areas, to ensure that those accommodations and those supports are targeted towards those students. We've noticed that there has been some discontinuity. There has been, in the past, we've noticed that maybe best practices weren't always elevated. And so we're making sure that that's something that all of our students receive, regardless of where they are in the system. We're looking at to make sure that with Dr. Michelle Madera, with the screenings, we're also looking to make sure that we identify our students earlier. We've heard from a number of students that there was a delay in the identification process. We've heard from our families over and over again. We're also working, to looking at our assessments and making sure that our school psychologists who are superiorly trained and very knowledgeable, but also that they are able to really understand the nuances of our students' abilities as well as areas of growth. And so we've been working with Dr. Larson, Ms. Larson, every single month in all areas to really support not only our students, but our staff and families as well.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. And I'm just a quick follow-up. I know that last year we had talked about, and I think it may have started a little bit, that there was this task force that was working with some of the parents who've been talking about this for a while. Is that still happening? Did it, because of everything, did it kind of get put aside, or where are we with
No,
that?
the committee, working group was developed, and it was led by Miss Mercedes Soto. We worked in collaboration with Miss Soto. We've, of course, with the pandemic, that kind of interrupted some things, but we led a district-wide for parents training session. We brought in guest speakers. We did Dyslexia Awareness Month for all of our schools. We bought different materials, children books, developed lesson plans, and dispersed them to all of our elementary schools to really bring more awareness about within our school community. Mercedes Soto, along with Lisa Downing, they worked with the city in order to light up light up the city. There was different there were different efforts made on that part, and we'll be reconvening again. Of course, the pandemic sort of disrupted some of our monthly meetings, but we'll be meeting again starting in the summer to continue to expand and increase our vision. So the committee, and it was not just for our students with dyslexia, it was for our students with reading difficulties, because we wanted to really, they really wanted to expand that and not limit families who had a concern about for their child. But the goal with working with the committee, we provided more clarity and understanding about the current assessments we use in the district. So we had our folks from research and assessment and our literacy coordinators provide more training for our families. We worked with some of the leading doctors in this area, research experts in this area around dyslexia screeners to provide our overview for our families, for the committee, and for the staff. We worked in tandem to do the report, and with the district, and Dr. Michelle Madera, we're working with MIT in order to bring additional training for our teachers, for our paraprofessionals, and for our special educators in August.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan. Councilor McGovern.
Yeah, I will. There's a lot. Obviously, as you said, Madam Chair, there's a lot to talk about, but it's late, and I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question about the transportation expenses. It looks like we're spending an additional $1 million in FY 2021, total of $11.5 million. So it's about a 15% increase. Can you help us understand why we need to spend so much money on student transportation?
Dr. Salim.
Yes, I'm going to have our Chief Operating Officer, Jim Maloney, speak to that.
Mr. Maloney, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we went back out to bid this year, and those prices reflect the bid prices. We do have, as a district, a policy that allows all children who live more than 1 mile away from their school in ages K to 5 to qualify for transportation. For the upper school students, it's 1.5 miles. We have a citywide assignment policy as opposed to most districts in the greater Boston area, and many of the districts in the greater Boston and around the country that have neighborhood schools. Those all add to our costs. We also, quite frankly, expect that may be higher, as Dr. Salim pointed out in his earlier comments. Social distancing on buses, if that's where we end up in the fall, is going to have an enormous impact on the number of buses that we will need. So that is sort of a summary of why we're spending that kind of money.
Dr. Salim, do you want to add anything? Otherwise, I'll go back to Councilor Zondervan.
No, I think Mr. Maloney captured it.
Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess, based on some of the comments Councilor Toomey made earlier, it is disconcerting that we're, on the one hand, not achieving the kind of desegregation that we would like to see in our schools, and on the other hand, spending so much money on busing, and then on the third hand, if we had three hands, not meeting our achievement goals in the district. So it just seems like there must be a better way to put these resources to work so that we can achieve the results we're looking for. Again, I don't expect a different answer, so I appreciate that explanation, and I will yield the floor. Thank you.
Did you want an answer from Dr. Salim?
Yes,
no, thank you. I yield the floor.
Councilor Zondervan yields the floor. Councilor Nolan.
Thank you. This will be a kind of short question, because it was the third question I had, and it is in the context of a budget, because the entire reason we're doing the budget is to provide a quality education. And I was disappointed that there was no mention in the budget of addressing the ongoing need to follow our own policies and provide support for schools that are struggling. Because I know this, I was on it, the school committee, even before me and during me, passed several orders saying what we really need to do is bring programmatic change to schools that are struggling to achieve the goals. So any school that has struggled in achievement, we're not doing well for those students. We know if your accountability percentile is in the bottom 20% of the state for years in a row, let's do what we know works. Cambridge's own data shows clearly Montessori, when we brought that into the Tobin, it shifted to being literally off the charts now in the 95th percentile for every subgroup across the ones that we're marking in terms of achievement in English and in math. The wraparound model at the Fletcher Maynard gives it a solid performance. Bilingual immersion at the King School has turned around and is now among the highest performing in the district after the Chinese immersion and the Chinese Nihao was brought in. And Amigos has always provided an off-the-charts experience for Hispanic and Latino students. So what I hope we do with these budgets, again, I'm really focused on disruptive change. Stop accepting that schools that are at the lowest in the state for achievement do not need programmatic change. And I'm not sure there's an answer to this. I expected to see that in the budget, but I recognize COVID may have taken it over. But let's not ever lose focus. It all has to be about every single one of our students be high achieving. And I guess it's a time to say now, I'm so totally torn about this budget. It is so underwhelming because of this. It is exactly the same, not addressing these key issues, and I'm tired of it. And I also want to support the new school committee. I want that leadership to get the message that I will be there for you, that I will do everything I can to remind us all of the promises, that if we really mean equity, we literally have to say every single one of our schools are schools that are performing well. And right now they're not. And I just can't emphasize enough that the answer usually is, well, we're working on it. Well, so much of it is what has been done in the past, and we really need disruptive change. And I appreciate, I served with Chair Simmons when she was mayor, and she really pushed us to say the same thing. So I have decided I can vote for it only if, for this year, to give 1 year, but if there's not massive change, and certainly outcome measures that are across the board 100% proficient for every kid, I can never vote for that again. And I really encourage us to take the hard look, be disruptive, follow our own policies, and have a budget that says, and actually puts money behind it for proven programs that work. I share some of the chair's concerns that flavor of the day, we've been there before. And there's many programs out there that are working with districts with half of our budget that we need to learn from them instead of not acting with the urgency that we deserve and our kids deserve. That's a question other than, because I was disappointed to see it in the budget of the programmatic change. I think it has to come for us to make sure we provide them with every single student a high quality education. So I hope to see it in a future budget.
Councilor Nolan yields the floor. The rest of the lineup is as follows. Councilor Toomey, announce he yields. Councilor Carlone, Councilor Sabrina Wheeler, our Vice Mayor. Our Mayor may have some remarks. So now we go to Councilor Toomey. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to go back to the student assignment process again. To the superintendent, so definitively, race is not used as a factor at all in the student assignment. Is that what you said?
Yes, and so that's actually federal law that we are unable to use race. And so like many communities that try to have some type of desegregation voluntary program, we do use, socioeconomic status as that measure.
Council Toomey.
I know the student assignment process is very, very difficult for parents to absorb. I believe it was former school committee woman Nancy Walsh actually wrote a book on the student assignment process. But can someone give just a quick brief how the student assignment process works, and does it meet that at the end of once those students are assigned, does all those schools meet that policy that you have in effect? And just looking at, as I said, looking at the numbers clearly, to me, it doesn't. How one school can end up 61% white and one at 86% non-white. So, if someone gives a quick, and maybe you can put in writing how the student assignment process works and whether we're adhering to even the socioeconomic. Because briefly looking at that, I don't think a lot of schools are meeting that either.
So Council Toomey, I would almost encourage you to ask for this in writing. It's not quite a budget question. I understand your concern about why we do the controlled choice program. The controlled choice program, which could be an evening unto itself. When you look at it, if you take it back to your earlier question, which was the context, is how does that affect the budget when you have this inequity? I would offer to our superintendent to then answer the question to say, how does the program work in the context of there's some schools that seem to be racially out of balance, and how does that impact the budget, which would be appropriate for this context. But to follow up on what you want to know, which is how does this program work and why are there such inequities by race, it's certainly a valid one. Dr. Celine, do you want to make an attempt to talk about?
Chair, Vice Chair Baum.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind tackling this. I'll try to be as really brief as possible. And I want to answer it from the perspective of a parent that just recently went through the process of identifying a school for my child. This is a very layered question. And there was recently an article that came out through the Harvard Education School. It was research about how people choose schools to send their children to. And so a lot of times, particularly in these progressive communities, the article pointed to that some of the challenges with school choice is that when people are of privilege and of a certain race, they tend to choose schools that make sense, that kind of aligns with their socioeconomic and racial status. And the same thing can be true as it relates to cohorts of color. And I think that's some of the pieces that we're trying to get at. And you layer that with the dynamic of people want to go to school, pick a school that's close to their home, in their community. And all of those things kind of play out in the school choice program. Then you layer in some of these programs that that Councilor Nolan was talking about. If you are of a background where English is not your first language, or you speak English, but you don't speak the language of the school that you want to put your child in, those are barriers for those parents choosing those schools that have higher academic outcomes, and that in and of itself is an inequity. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy around who selects certain schools based on their identity, based on location, and based on the preferences that they want for their school. I'll be intentional about sending that article out to everyone here today, but some of this stuff really goes a bit deeper as it relates to how parents make decisions around the places that they want to send their children to. a lot of times that falls onto Black families to go to those schools where there are predominantly white families, but the reverse isn't there a lot. You don't see tons of white families trying to go to the Fletcher and Maynard, and they have great programming. Principal Harris, who's going to be a district leader soon, is a phenomenal principal, and she really meets the needs of her students. But that still does not encourage certain cohorts and demographics of people within the city, particularly white families, to go to that school. So it's a very layered question, and I think that Counselor Simmons is right that we should have a roundtable on it, because it gets to all of these issues that we're dealing with in the public square right now when it comes to the intersection of race and systemic racism that's been a part of all of our institutions for a very long time, that is systematically set up to undermine particularly kids of color. And some of that is by the decisions that we make,
right? And
as a community.
I certainly agree with this. And this was the difficulty of the finance committee or this meeting. It is a finance, and the reason why I'm sort of trying to keep the hard line here, it is the finance committee, and we're inclined to sort of go outside of the lines, and it's because we want to hear this information and know the impact, and they may not always be budget related. But to go back to Councilor Toomey's question, it's when you see the schools on paper, and when you go to the graduations, which is even more telling, you see this disparity. And there's those of us that work so hard to hold up, lift up, and hold on to controlled choice. But you also see that in the budget, where it looks as if, I think this is Councilor Toomey's point, and to bring it back, into the budget context, is that there are schools that then become resource rich, and also look like they have more on paper, and maybe they do, because of the parent body there. So it's a longer conversation, Madam Vice Chair, and I know you get that. And I do appreciate Councilor Toomey's question, and it's two things. One, it's something that we all need to look at as a group and have a conversation. And again, I know the mayor's been looking to find dates and times and juggle COVID-19 and all its nuances at the same time. But it would be very important for us to have that conversation and figure out if there's something, because we're all responsible. I always say there's only one child, and that child's called all children, and they belong to all of us. So how do we as a body work to see if we can get that what is and looks like inequity more equitable? Councilor Toomey.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair and the Vice Chair Bowman, for their comments. And I do believe you're correct that this is a larger discussion that should take place, and hopefully in a roundtable on this issue. And so I look forward to that. And as an aside, it's my understanding that the principal of Fletcher Main Academy, Robin Harris, is retiring this year, and I just want to thank her for her many years of dedicated and long service to the Cambridge Public School students.
So, Councilor Toomey, she's retiring from the school, but she's going into the administration. She's going to be the equity, bridges, and belonging person, I think. Don't hold me to that. Thank you for your question, Councilor Toomey. Councilor Toomey is yielding the floor to you, Councilor Carlone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have no more questions related to the budget.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler, you have the floor.
I have no further questions, and yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Vice Mayor Mallon, you have the floor.
I have no further questions, Madam Co-Chair. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Madam Vice Mayor. Madam Mayor, is there something that you would like to say before we call for a vote?
I just want to thank my colleagues on the City Council for their questions. I think a lot of people have raised really key points that I think that this committee has had a challenge with, right? It is about looking at the data and the outcomes, and I think we have to look to the future and in the midst of what COVID is doing, and I'm certainly committed, as I know so many of the committee members are, of figuring out, even in this process, who we're not engaging and who can't be engaged. Those are the same people who are reflected, scholars who are reflected in our outcomes. So I think I understand that frustration. I feel it. And, you know, I really, but want to say that we do have our work cut out for us. And it's going to take new ideas, new people, and in our system, and, you know, structural change, right? I wanted to read you something really briefly. Our Education Week article noted that more people are likely to pass the bar exam than an elementary teacher licensing exam, with more than half of all aspiring elementary teachers failing the exam the first time, and only 38% of Black candidates and 57% of Latinx candidates ever passing the most common teacher licensing test, compared to 75% of white candidates. And this year, the committee went to DESE, wrote a letter saying we need alternate assessments. We need to be thinking not only about this budget, but a lot of the policy that exists that really undermines anything we try to do in this budget. So it's, you know, a lot of work is ahead, and, you know, we really have to hold ourselves accountable. And, you know, I'm committed to doing it, and the committee members are. And there's a lot we will need support and help on, and some things that we aren't going to get right and haven't been getting right. And I think we'll even have to see during this process, we'll need to go to the city manager. And if that is because of work that's related to anti-racism, if it's work related to obviously COVID, I'm, you know, committed to working together with the city manager and getting what we need. So just thanks again to all my counselors for raising really good, important questions.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Vice Chair Bowman and Co-Chair Fantini, any last remarks before we take our final vote? I believe our Co-Chair Fantini is going to close us out. So Co-Chair Fantini, before we call for the vote, I will have you take the floor.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor. Actually, I think I'll just keep it really short because we've had a long night. I just wanted to thank the City Council for the questions that they've asked, and for the reasonable and responsible challenges that they put before us. That I can assure you that in future meetings with you, will I think, convince you that we're making progress on all of the challenges that you put for us when we have more time to talk. And I think it's important that we also recognize that there's wraparound services that all our children need, and we need to engage the City Council in those discussions as well. So I'd just like to close and say, you know, we got a unanimous vote for the budget with the school committee. There were 5 new members. I think through the process, we've learned to grow and respect each other, and to pass a budget that we think starts to move us in the right direction. And so I think the momentum of 5 new members has put us in a different and better place. And I hope that same momentum tonight delivers a majority vote for us to continue that work. Thank you.
And thank you, Co-Chair Fantini, for your remarks and also for your service. To my colleagues on the school committee, Mr. R. Weinstein, Ms. Weinstein, Mr. Rojas, Ms. Wilson, I think I got everyone, I hope. I want to thank you for your participation this evening. You're going to say, well, we really didn't participate. And the unusual part of the budget hearing is we don't necessarily hear from the school committee members, but by their representatives, which are the co-chairs. But I do look forward to having an opportunity to sit down, look in your faces somehow, and have a robust discussion around some of the issues that came up, like the equity and inclusion, controlled choice, buildings and grounds. And I did tune in to you of a few of your meetings, and I know that you work very, very hard, and I thank you for that work. So again, I thank you for your participation this evening, and I look forward to working for you in the future. So the chair would like to entertain a vote to send the school department budget to the City Council with a favorable recommendation. Is there a motion?
So moved.
On a motion by Councilor Toomey to move it forward, Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
On the motion, Councilor Carlo.
Yes.
Yes. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor McGovern.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Nolan.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Simmons.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Counselor Toomey?
Yes.
Yes. Counselor Zondervan?
Present.
Present. Mayor Siddiqui?
Yes.
Motion passes 8 in favor, 1 present.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn on a motion by Co-Chair Carlone to adjourn the Finance Committee's meeting. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
On the motion, Counselor Carlone?
Yes.
Yes. Vice Mayor Mallon?
Yes.
Yes. Counselor McGovern?
Yes.
Yes. Counselor Nolan?
Yes.
Yes. Counselor Simmons?
Yes.
Yes. Counselor Sabrina Wheeler?
Yes.
Yes. Counselor Toomey?
Yes.
Yes. Counselor Zondervan?
Yes.
Yes. Mayor Siddiqui?
Yes.
Motion passes 9 in favor, 0 against.
The Finance Committee meeting is adjourned. Thank you.